You just made the biggest mistake of your life. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Brenda Knox, Blackridge Women's Prison's undisputed queen of violence, had just dumped a table full of rotting food scraps onto a quiet black woman's breakfast tray. The cafeteria erupted in laughter, brutal, hungry laughter that fed on humiliation. But the woman didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't even flinch. She simply looked up at Brenda with eyes that weren't filled with fear. They were filled with assessment, cold, calculating, professional. In that moment, Brenda Knox felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 years of terrorizing inmates: doubt. She had just chosen the wrong target. The woman's name was Naomi Cole, and she wasn't what anyone thought she was. If you want to see how a monster learns fear, stay with me until the very end. Like this story and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Naomi's story travels. The morning sun barely penetrated the reinforced windows of Blackridge Women's Correctional Facility, casting the cafeteria in a perpetual twilight that matched the mood of its inhabitants. The smell of industrial disinfectant mixed with overcooked eggs and burnt coffee created an odor that had become synonymous with incarceration itself. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, and the breakfast shift was in full swing, 300 women moving through choreographed routines they'd performed so many times that thought was no longer required. Naomi Cole sat alone at the corner table nearest the kitchen entrance, the same spot she'd occupied every morning for the past 11 months. She was 38 years old, though the harsh fluorescent lighting made her appear both younger and older simultaneously, younger in the smoothness of her dark skin, older in the depth of her eyes. She wore her hair in a simple, tight bun that revealed the elegant bone structure of her face, and she moved with an economy of motion that most people mistook for timidity. She never was timid. Around her, the cafeteria churned with the particular energy of women locked in proximity, but not community. Conversations happened in clusters. The drug dealers near the north wall, the white supremacists by the serving line, the gang affiliates scattered strategically throughout, and the unaffiliated survivors who'd learned to make themselves small and unremarkable. Naomi belonged to the last category, or so everyone assumed. She lifted her plastic fork to her mouth, chewing mechanically while her eyes performed their morning reconnaissance. Guard Patterson was late for his shift again, the third time this week. The new inmate, Rodriguez, had already aligned herself with the Hermanas Unidas. Smart move for someone facing 15 years. The kitchen worker called Peaches had a fresh bruise on her left wrist, which meant someone was extorting her again. Naomi cataloged it all without appearing to notice anything at all. This was her gift and her curse. She saw everything. Well, 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 look what we got here. The voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade through fabric. Conversations died in concentric circles spreading outward from Naomi's table. The voice belonged to Brenda Knox, and when Brenda Knox spoke, silence was the only acceptable response. Brenda was a monument to institutional violence. At 42, she'd spent 18 of those years inside various correctional facilities, and she'd learned to weaponize every aspect of her presence. She stood 6 feet tall, with shoulders that had been built in the prison gym and maintained through intimidation that ensured she always got first access to the weight room. Her face bore the roadmap of her history: a scar through her left eyebrow from a knife fight in county, a permanently swollen knuckle on her right hand from breaking a woman's jaw, and eyes that had long ago lost the capacity for empathy. She wasn't alone. She never was. To her right stood Kimberly Razor Chen, a wiry Asian woman whose nickname came from her preferred method of settling disputes. To her left was Deshawn Williams, a black woman who'd earned her spot in Brenda's inner circle through sheer brutality during a tier war 2 years prior. Behind them, 3 more women: Brenda's court, her enforcers, the physical manifestation of her will within Blackridge's walls. Naomi looked up slowly, her expression neutral, her hand still holding her fork and tray. "I'm talking to you, sweetheart," Brenda said, moving closer. Her boots, contraband work boots she'd intimidated a guard into providing, struck the tile floor with deliberate heaviness. "You deaf or just stupid?" "Neither," Naomi said quietly. Her voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. "Good morning, Brenda. How are you today?" The question landed like a foreign object in a familiar landscape. Around them, inmates froze. No one spoke to Brenda Knox with politeness. You either cowered or fought back. Those were the only languages she understood. Courtesy was an unknown dialect, and it made her pause for just a fraction of a second. Then her face darkened. How am I? Brenda leaned down, placing both hands on Naomi's table. Her breath smelled like the cheap cigarettes she bought from commissary. I'm annoyed. You know why I'm annoyed? Naomi set down her fork with careful precision. I don't. Because you're sitting at my table. The seating is unassigned during breakfast hours, Naomi said, her tone still remarkably even. According to the institutional handbook, any inmate may sit at any available. Do I look like I give a fuck about the institutional handbook? Brenda's voice rose, and the cafeteria's attention intensified. This was how it always started: the public challenge, the assertion of dominance, the spectacle that reminded everyone who held real power in Blackridge. This is my table, has been for 5 years. You new girls always gotta learn the hard way. I've been here 11 months, Naomi said, and I didn't know this table had been claimed. I apologize for the misunderstanding. She started to stand, gathering her tray, but Brenda's hand shot out and shoved her back down with enough force to rattle the table. Nah. You don't get to just walk away. See, there's a tax for sitting at my table. A stupid tax. Brenda's smile was vicious. And you're gonna pay it right now. I don't want any trouble, Naomi said. Her eyes remained steady, but something flickered in their depths. Not fear exactly, but a kind of calculation that was happening at speeds too fast to follow. Too late for that, sweetheart. Brenda straightened and turned to the nearest table, the one where the kitchen workers stored the trash bins before hauling them out. With theatrical flair, she grabbed the bin full of food scraps, coffee grounds, and the morning's accumulated waste. The crowd of inmates leaned forward collectively, anticipating the familiar ritual of humiliation. Open wide, Brenda said, and upended the entire contents onto Naomi's breakfast tray. Gravy mixed with coffee grounds. Eggshells landed on toast. Soggy napkins covered everything in a blanket of institutional waste. The pile grew until it spilled over the tray's edges and onto the table, onto Naomi's uniform pants, onto her carefully maintained sense of order. Laughter erupted. The harsh, relieved laughter of people, grateful they weren't the target. Razor was cackling. Deshawn was shaking her head with a grin. Even some of the uninvolved inmates were smiling, because in prison you laughed at everything that didn't happen to you. Brenda stood back, arms crossed, waiting for the reaction she'd earned from dozens of previous victims. The tears, the anger, the submission, the fear. But Naomi didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even stand up. She simply looked down at the mess covering her breakfast, then back up at Brenda Knox. And in her eyes was something that made Brenda's triumph curdle in her chest. Naomi wasn't afraid. She was thinking. You got something to say? Brenda demanded, her voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. No, Naomi said quietly. Nothing at all. Good. Then you know who runs shit now. Brenda turned to her crew. Let's get breakfast. I'm starving. As they walked away, the cafeteria slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Conversations resumed. Forks scraped against trays. But several women kept glancing at Naomi's table, where she sat perfectly still amid the wreckage of her breakfast, her expression unchanged. Guard Patterson finally arrived, 7 minutes late, and surveyed the cafeteria with the disinterest of someone who'd stopped caring years ago. His eyes passed over Naomi's table without registering anything unusual. Naomi stood slowly, carefully gathering the soiled tray. She walked to the disposal area and scraped the mess into the waste bin with the same methodical precision she'd used to eat her breakfast. Then she placed the tray in the washing station and walked toward the cafeteria exit. Hey, the voice was quiet, coming from her left. Naomi turned to find a white woman in her mid-50s watching her with concerned eyes. Her name was Margaret Holloway, and she'd been inside Blackridge for 7 years on a manslaughter charge. She was one of the rare inmates who'd maintained some measure of humanity despite the environment. You okay, honey? Margaret asked. I'm fine, Naomi said. Brenda Knox is... I know who she is, Naomi interrupted gently. Thank you for your concern, Margaret. I appreciate it. She continued walking, leaving Margaret standing there with a worried expression that Naomi had seen before on other faces in other places. People always worried about the quiet ones when predators circled. They never understood that quiet wasn't the same as helpless. The morning proceeded according to schedule. At 7:30 a.m., Naomi reported to her assignment in the prison library, where she worked as a cataloging assistant. The library was her sanctuary, a space filled with order and systems and logic that functioned regardless of the chaos outside its walls. She spent 4 hours reshelving books, updating the card catalog system that the prison still used because technology upgrades weren't in the budget, and helping inmates find resources for their legal appeals or GED preparation. At 11 a.m., she took her lunch break in the courtyard. It was a cold October day, the kind where the wind cut through the inadequate prison jackets and reminded everyone that winter was coming. Most inmates stayed inside, but Naomi preferred the cold to the crowds. She sat on a concrete bench near the chain-link fence and ate the sandwich she'd saved from breakfast, peanut butter and jelly, still sealed in its plastic wrapper, untouched by Brenda's trash. She wasn't alone for long. "Yo, library girl!" Naomi looked up to find a young black woman approaching. Her name was Tamika Johnson, 23 years old, serving 6 years for armed robbery. She was bright, impulsive, and still learning how to survive in a place that punished both qualities. "Hello, Tamika," Naomi said. "You crazy or something?" Tamika sat down without invitation, her energy filling the space between them. "You know what Brenda Knox does to people who don't show proper respect?" "I showed respect," Naomi said. "I apologized for the misunderstanding." "That ain't what I mean, and you know it. You supposed to act scared. You supposed to cry or beg or at least look bothered." Tamika studied her face. "But you just sat there like she dumped trash on somebody else." Would reacting differently have changed the outcome? Maybe not, but it would have satisfied her. Now she's going to come back harder. She can't have people thinking you weren't affected. Naomi took a small bite of her sandwich, chewing thoughtfully before responding. "What would you have done?" "Me?" Tamika laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I would have swung on her and got my ass beat. Then I'd be in the SHU for 30 days, and she'd still run everything when I got out. That's why I ain't giving you advice. I'm terrible at this survival shit." "You're doing better than you think," Naomi said. "You're still alive, still whole, and you're 8 months closer to going home." 28 months left, Tamika corrected. "Not that I'm counting." They sat in silence for a moment, watching their breath form clouds in the cold air. From inside the building came the muted sounds of the prison, doors slamming, voices echoing, the constant low-level noise that never entirely stopped. "Can I ask you something?" Tamika said eventually. "Of course." "What you in for?" It was the question everyone asked eventually, the prison greeting that replaced "how are you" in the outside world. Naomi had prepared her answer long ago. "Manslaughter," she said. "I killed someone." "Self-defense?" The court didn't see it that way. Tamika nodded slowly. "How long you got?" 15 years. I've served 3. "Damn." Tamika was quiet for a moment. "You seem too, I don't know, together for that long a sentence. Most people either get hard or break down. You're just calm." "Calm is a choice," Naomi said. "So is everything else." The bell rang for the end of lunch period. Inmates began filing back inside from various corners of the yard. Tamika stood, brushing off her pants. "Watch your back, Naomi. Brenda ain't done with you." "I know," Naomi said, "but thank you." As Tamika walked away, Naomi remained seated for an additional 30 seconds, finishing her sandwich with the same measured movements she applied to everything. Then she stood, deposited her wrapper in the trash receptacle, and followed the flow of women back inside. The afternoon passed in similar fashion to every other afternoon. She returned to the library, processed 14 new intake books from a donation program, and helped an inmate named Sarah find case law related to ineffective assistance of counsel. At 4 p.m., she returned to her cell. A single-occupancy unit she'd been assigned after her cellmate was transferred to another facility 6 months prior. The cell was 8 feet by 10 feet, containing a narrow bed bolted to the wall, a combination toilet and sink unit, a small metal desk, and a shelf for personal items. Naomi had arranged her space with precision, 3 books from the library, a family photo in a plastic frame, a notebook and 2 pens, and a small collection of letters from her sister. Everything had its place. Everything served a purpose. She sat on the bed and opened her notebook, adding the day's observations to the running record she'd maintained since her arrival at Black Ridge. October 15th. Patterson late again. Possible substance issue or external crisis. Rodriguez has aligned with HU, standard protection move. Peaches being extorted. Left wrist bruise suggests repeated grabbing. Brenda Knox publicly challenged me, likely escalation incoming. Tamika Johnson continues positive trajectory, should encourage educational focus. She wrote in tiny, precise handwriting that allowed her to fit maximum information on each page. The notebook appeared to be a journal, but it was actually an intelligence database. Patterns, behaviors, weaknesses, strengths, opportunities, and threats all cataloged in a personal shorthand she'd developed years ago. There was a sharp rap on her cell bars. "Cole, you got a visitor." Naomi looked up to find guard Davis standing outside her cell. Davis was one of the decent ones, firm but fair, didn't take bribes, didn't abuse her authority. She'd been at Black Ridge for 12 years and had developed the 1,000-yard stare common to people who'd seen too much human suffering. "A visitor?" Naomi set down her notebook. "I wasn't expecting anyone." "Legal visit. Your attorney is here." Naomi's expression didn't change, but something tightened in her chest. She hadn't seen her attorney, Marcus Webb, in 4 months. Legal visits outside of scheduled check-ins usually meant something had changed, either very good or very bad. She followed Davis through the familiar maze of corridors to the attorney-client visiting room, a small space with a table, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. Marcus Webb was already seated, his briefcase open on the table, his suit slightly rumpled in the way it always was by the end of a long day. Marcus was 46 years old, African-American, with graying hair at his temples and eyes that still held the idealism that drew him to criminal defense work 2 decades earlier. He'd taken Naomi's case pro bono through his firm's public service program, initially expecting a standard self-defense claim that had gone wrong. What he'd found instead had complicated everything. "Naomi," he said, standing as she entered. "Thank you for seeing me on short notice." "Of course." She sat across from him, her posture perfect, her hands folded on the table. "What's happened?" Marcus closed the door and returned to his seat. For a moment he just looked at her, and she saw the war happening behind his eyes, the lawyer who needed information versus the human who cared about her well-being. "I've been approached," he said finally, "by someone who wants to discuss your case, someone from your previous life." The room seemed to contract. Naomi's expression remained neutral, but her breathing changed almost imperceptibly. "Who?" she asked. "He wouldn't give me his real name. Called himself Mr. Gray. He knew details about your background that aren't in any public record, details about what you did before the incident that brought you here." "What did he want?" "He wanted me to deliver a message." Marcus reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope. "He said you'd understand what it means, and he said that if you're interested in what he's offering, you should indicate that through me." Naomi stared at the envelope without reaching for it. "Did he threaten you?" "No, he was actually quite polite, but there was something about him that made it very clear refusal wasn't really an option." Marcus slid the envelope across the table. "I don't know what's in here, Naomi, and before you open it, I need you to understand something. Whatever you were before you came to Black Ridge, I don't need to know the details. My job is to represent you within the legal system. But if this message represents some kind of illegal activity or puts you in danger, I can't be part of it. Do you understand?" "I understand," Naomi said. She picked up the envelope. It was unmarked, sealed with simple tape, and weighed almost nothing. "Should I wait?" Marcus asked. "No, I'll read it privately. If there's anything you need to know, I'll tell you during our next scheduled visit." Marcus studied her face, looking for cracks in the composure she maintained so effortlessly. "Are you in danger?" "Probably," she said. "But I've been in danger for a very long time. This doesn't change anything." "That's not reassuring." "It wasn't meant to be." She met his eyes directly. "Thank you for delivering this, Marcus, and thank you for everything you've done for my case. I know the appeals process is slow." "We're making progress," he said, though they both knew that was optimistic at best. The ineffective counsel argument has some traction, and the self-defense claim was improperly handled at trial. It's just a matter of finding the right appellate angle. "I know, and I'm grateful." The visit ended with the standard pleasantries and promises to stay in touch. Davis escorted Naomi back to her cell, where she was locked in for the evening count. Only when she was alone did she open the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 lines of text. "The contract is still active. The network needs you. Send word if you wish to discuss terms." Naomi read it 3 times, then held the paper to the light from her window, checking for watermarks or hidden messages. There were none. It was exactly what it appeared to be, a job offer from people who didn't take no for an answer. She sat on her bed, the paper resting in her lap, and allowed herself 5 full minutes to think about the implications. The contract. That word carried the weight of her entire previous life, a life she'd deliberately left behind, a life that had ended with a man's death and her conviction for manslaughter because telling the truth about who she was and what she'd been would have meant revealing things that certain powerful people wanted to remain hidden. Before Blackridge, Naomi Cole had been one of the most effective contract operatives in a network that didn't officially exist. She'd specialized in surgical problem solving for clients who needed absolute discretion and 0 collateral damage. She'd been trained by people who'd forgotten more about combat and infiltration than most special forces operators would ever learn. And she'd been very, very good at her job. Then she'd taken a contract that went wrong. Not wrong in execution, she'd completed the objective perfectly. Wrong in aftermath. The target had been supposed to be alone, but his 18-year-old daughter had come home early, had seen Naomi leaving, had confronted her father, and learned what he'd done to deserve what happened to him. The girl had been traumatized but unharmed. Naomi had turned herself in the next day, had confessed to killing the man, and had accepted the manslaughter charge even though her court-appointed attorney had botched the self-defense claim so badly that Marcus was still trying to fix it 3 years later. She'd done this because the network had promised that if she kept silent about who she'd worked for and what she'd really been doing, they would ensure the girl received protection and support. They'd kept that promise. Naomi had verified it through carefully maintained channels. The girl was in college now, studying psychology, alive and whole because Naomi had traded her freedom for that outcome. And now the network was calling her back. She picked up her pen and notebook, turning to a blank page. She began writing possibilities, outcomes, risks, and opportunities. What would accepting this offer mean? What leverage did she have? What would refusal cost her? The analysis took 2 hours. When she finished, she had her answer. She wasn't going back. Whatever they were offering, whatever they thought they needed her for, she was done with that life. She'd made a different choice. A choice to serve her sentence, to maintain her humanity in an inhumane place, and to eventually rebuild something that looked like a normal existence. The network would be disappointed. They might even be dangerous in their disappointment. But Naomi had survived worse than their displeasure. She tore the message into tiny pieces and flushed them down her toilet, watching the paper dissolve in the water before it disappeared into the prison's plumbing system. Then she returned to her bed and picked up one of her library books, a history of the civil rights movement that she'd been reading to a semi-literate inmate named Jackie during their weekly tutoring sessions. She was 3 pages in when her cell bars rattled. "Cole." Naomi looked up to find 3 women standing outside her cell. They weren't guards. They were inmates, members of Brenda Knox's inner circle, Razor, Deshawn, and a 3rd woman named Carlotta, who specialized in sending messages. "Brenda wants to see you," Carlotta said. Her voice was flat, affectless, the tone of someone delivering information that didn't concern her personally. "When?" Naomi asked, setting down her book. "Now. We're on lockdown for evening count. Guards are taking a break. Tiers clear for the next 10 minutes. Carlotta pulled out a key, a guard's key, which meant this visit had been arranged with official corruption. "You coming voluntary or we dragging you?" Naomi stood slowly. She could refuse, she could scream for the guards, and even corrupted staff would have to respond eventually. But that would only delay the confrontation, and delay gave Brenda Knox time to plan something worse. "I'll come voluntarily," Naomi said. The cell door opened. Naomi stepped out into the tier, and immediately Razor and Deshawn moved to flank her. They walked in formation down the corridor, Carlotta in front, Naomi in the middle, her escorts on either side. The tier was indeed empty, the other inmates locked in their cells, watching through their bars with the hungry attention of people hoping to witness something worth talking about later. They took Naomi to the tier's rec room, a space normally used for board games and television watching, now converted into Brenda Knox's throne room. The chairs had been pushed against the walls, creating an open space in the center. Brenda sat on a weight bench she'd dragged in from the gym, her posture relaxed, her expression amused. "There she is," Brenda said, "the library girl who don't know her place." Naomi stopped in the center of the room. Razor and Deshawn moved to block the door. Carlotta took a position against the wall, arms crossed, face blank. "I apologized for the misunderstanding," Naomi said. "I've moved to a different table. I'm not looking for conflict." "Yeah, about that." Brenda stood, rolling her shoulders like a boxer warming up. "See, I've been thinking about this morning. About how you didn't react right, didn't cry, didn't get angry, didn't show me proper respect. That bothered me all day." "I'm sorry you were bothered." "No, you ain't, but you will be." Brenda stepped closer. "Here's how this works. You disrespected me in front of the whole cafeteria, so now you're going to pay for that in front of my crew. Nothing personal, just business." Naomi's breathing remained steady. Her heart rate elevated slightly, but her hands stayed loose at her sides. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to kneel." The words hung in the air. "Kneel," Brenda repeated. "Right here, right now. Kneel and apologize proper. Call me queen. Mean it." Around the room, Razor and Deshawn watched with anticipation. This was the moment that would define Naomi's entire prison experience. If she knelt, she'd spend the next 12 years as Brenda Knox's property. A servant, a victim, a cautionary tale about the cost of resistance. If she refused, "No," Naomi said quietly. Brenda's smile widened. "No? I won't kneel, and I won't call you queen, but I will leave this room and continue avoiding conflict if you'll allow it." "Oh, sweetheart, you really don't understand how this works, do you?" Brenda cracked her knuckles. "The only way you leaving this room is broken. After that, maybe you'll understand respect." She moved forward with the confidence of someone who'd won dozens of similar confrontations. Her right hand came up in a wide, powerful hook aimed at Naomi's jaw, a punch designed to hurt and humiliate, to establish dominance through overwhelming force. It never landed. Naomi's body shifted 6 inches to the left with minimal effort, letting the punch pass through empty air. Her expression didn't change. She simply wasn't where Brenda expected her to be. "Stay still," Brenda growled, throwing a left jab. Naomi stepped back, creating distance with footwork so economical it looked like she was standing still until the moment she wasn't. The jab missed by 3 inches. "I said I don't want conflict," Naomi repeated. "Too bad." Brenda charged forward with both hands swinging in combinations she'd learned through street fighting and prison brawls. The attack was aggressive, practiced, and would have overwhelmed most opponents through sheer ferocity. Naomi moved like water flowing around rocks. Each punch found nothing but air. She didn't counterattack. She didn't try to hurt Brenda. She simply refused to be where the violence was happening, creating negative space with the kind of spatial awareness that couldn't be taught, only developed through thousands of hours of training that had nothing to do with prison yard fights. "What the fuck?" Razor said from the doorway, her voice confused. Brenda was breathing hard now, frustration mounting as her attacks connected with nothing. She changed tactics, trying to grab Naomi in a grappling hold that would negate the movement advantage. Naomi's hand came up and touched Brenda's wrist. Just a touch. Barely any pressure, but it redirected the grab with perfect leverage that sent Brenda stumbling 2 steps to the right. "This doesn't have to continue," Naomi said, her voice still maddeningly calm. "We can both walk away." "Fuck that," Brenda roared. She grabbed the weight bench and threw it at Naomi. The bench tumbled through the air, 30 pounds of metal and vinyl spinning toward Naomi's head. A normal person would have frozen. A normal person would have taken the impact. Naomi sidestepped with minimal movement, letting the bench crash into the wall behind her. Then, for the first time, she stopped retreating. "Brenda," she said, and something in her tone made everyone in the room go still. "You need to stop now." But Brenda Knox had never stopped when someone asked. She charged forward one final time, putting all her weight and fury behind a straight punch aimed at Naomi's face. What happened next took approximately 1.7 seconds. Naomi's left hand came up and guided Brenda's punch past her head with a circular motion that borrowed all the force Brenda had generated. Her right hand touched Brenda's extended elbow. Not a strike, just a precise application of pressure at the joint. Her foot hooked behind Brenda's advancing leg. Brenda Knox, Blackridge's most feared inmate, went down like a building in a controlled demolition. She hit the floor face first with enough impact to rattle her teeth, and before she could process what had happened, Naomi had her arm locked in a position that made even breathing painful. "Don't move," Naomi said quietly. "I have your shoulder. If I apply 8 pounds of additional pressure, your rotator cuff will tear. 12 pounds will dislocate the joint. I don't want to hurt you, but I will if you continue attacking me." The room was absolutely silent. Razor and Deshawn stood frozen, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Carlotta had her hand over her mouth. "You broke my nose," Brenda gasped, blood streaming onto the floor. "No," Naomi said. "You broke your nose when you fell. I didn't strike you even once." She released the arm lock and stood up in one fluid motion, stepping back to give Brenda space. The larger woman pushed herself up slowly, her nose bleeding, her pride shattered, her eyes filled with something that might have been fear or might have been rage, or possibly both. "What the fuck are you?" Brenda demanded. Naomi looked at her for a long moment. Then she spoke 4 words that would echo through Blackridge for months to come. "I'm the quiet one." She walked to the door. Razor and Deshawn moved aside without conscious thought, their bodies responding to something their minds hadn't fully processed yet. Naomi walked past them, down the tier, back to her cell. She stepped inside and pulled the door closed, though it wouldn't lock without a guard's key. Then she sat on her bed and picked up her book, returning to the exact page where she'd left off, as if the last 10 minutes had never happened. Behind her, in the rec room, Brenda Knox was discovering what it felt like to be the one who'd chosen the wrong target. And word was already spreading through the tier, cell to cell, whisper to whisper, carrying a question that would reshape the power dynamics of Blackridge Women's Correctional Facility. Who the hell was Naomi Cole? The silence in Naomi's cell lasted exactly 43 seconds before the whispers started. They began as hushed conversations between cellmates, then spread like wildfire through the ventilation system, carried from tier to tier by voices that had learned to project without shouting. Within an hour, every woman in Blackridge knew some version of what had happened in the rec room. The details varied. Some said Naomi had broken both of Brenda's arms. Others claimed she'd used some kind of martial arts nobody had ever seen before. But the core truth remained consistent across all tellings. The quiet library girl had put Brenda Knox on the floor without breaking a sweat. Naomi heard the whispers but didn't acknowledge them. She read her book until lights out at 10 p.m., then lay in the darkness listening to the familiar symphony of prison nighttime, the coughs and sobs and occasional screams that punctuated the hours between sunset and dawn. She didn't sleep immediately. Instead, she ran through the confrontation in her mind, analyzing each moment for mistakes. She'd made 3. First, she'd allowed herself to be isolated with Brenda's crew. That was tactically unsound, even if refusing would have only delayed the inevitable. Second, she demonstrated capability far beyond what her cover story as a manslaughter convict should have allowed. That would create questions she'd prefer not to answer. Third, and most critically, she'd revealed herself to be a threat rather than a victim, which meant the predators in Blackridge would now approach her differently, not as prey, but as competition. The network would be disappointed in her sloppiness, but the network didn't have to live in a cage with 300 violent women, and their disappointment was no longer her concern. She finally slept around midnight, falling into the light, tactical rest she'd trained herself to achieve. Not truly unconscious, but conserving energy while remaining alert to environmental changes. It was a skill that had saved her life more than once in her previous profession, and it translated well to an environment where vulnerability meant victimhood. Morning came with the harsh clang of cell doors being electronically unlocked at 6:00 a.m. Naomi rose, made her bed with military precision, and prepared for breakfast with the same routine she'd maintained for 11 months. But when she stepped out of her cell, she immediately felt the difference. Women were staring. Not with the usual prison mix of boredom and hostility, but with a focused attention that made the air feel heavier. Conversations stopped as she walked past. Inmates who'd never acknowledged her existence before now tracked her movement with predatory calculation. Even the guards seemed to be watching her more closely, their usual indifference replaced by wary curiosity. Naomi kept her expression neutral and her pace steady as she walked to the cafeteria. The crowd parted for her in ways it never had before. Small gestures of respect or fear, she couldn't tell which, appeared in her path. A woman named Torres, who'd once shoulder-checked her in the corridor, now pressed herself against the wall to let Naomi pass. A guard who typically demanded verbal responses to routine questions simply nodded and waved her through. The cafeteria fell silent when she entered. 300 women in various stages of breakfast stopped what they were doing and turned to watch her. The serving line froze. Even the kitchen workers visible through the service window paused mid-task. The silence was absolute, expectant, waiting for some signal that would tell them how to process what they'd heard versus what they were seeing. Naomi walked to the serving line, accepted her tray from a worker who wouldn't meet her eyes, and surveyed the seating area. Her usual corner table was occupied by 5 women who immediately stood up and moved away without a word. She walked to the table, set down her tray, and began eating her breakfast with the same measured calm she'd displayed every morning for the past year. Slowly, conversation resumed, but it was different now, quieter, more controlled, with frequent glances in her direction. "May I sit here?" Naomi looked up to find Margaret Holloway standing beside her table, holding her breakfast tray with uncertain hands. The older woman's face showed genuine concern mixed with something that might have been maternal protectiveness. "Of course," Naomi said, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. Margaret sat down carefully, as if approaching a wild animal that might startle. "I heard what happened last night," she said quietly. "The whole prison heard what happened last night." "I imagine they did. Brenda Knox has 3 broken ribs, a fractured nose, and a dislocated shoulder. She's in the infirmary claiming she fell down some stairs." Margaret leaned forward, lowering her voice even further. "Everyone knows that's bullshit. Everyone knows you put her there." "She attacked me," Naomi said simply. "I defended myself." "Honey, nobody defends themselves against Brenda Knox. People survive her if they're lucky, but they don't walk away without a scratch while she's the one bleeding." Margaret studied Naomi's face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "Who are you really? Because you're not just some woman who killed someone in self-defense." "That's exactly who I am." "No." Margaret shook her head. "I've been inside 7 years. I've seen killers, fighters, survivors, and everything in between. What you did last night, that wasn't prison yard fighting. That was professional." Naomi set down her fork and met Margaret's eyes directly. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth would be nice." "The truth is I'm serving 15 years for manslaughter. The truth is I work in the library. I keep to myself, and I don't want trouble. The truth is Brenda Knox forced a confrontation, and I responded with the minimum force necessary to end the threat." Naomi's voice remained gentle but carried an edge of finality. "Those are the only truths that matter in here." Margaret was quiet for a moment, processing this non-answer. "Minimum force," she repeated. "You broke 3 of her ribs with minimum force." "She broke her own ribs when she fell. I never struck her." "That's what makes it terrifying." Margaret picked up her coffee with slightly shaking hands. "People are scared, Naomi. Not of Brenda anymore. Of you. Do you understand what that means?" "It means people will leave me alone." "No. It means people will test you. The young ones who want to make a reputation, the crazy ones who don't care about consequences, the ones who think they can take you if they're smart enough, or fast enough, or vicious enough." Margaret's eyes were sad. "You've painted a target on your back, honey. And that target won't go away until someone proves you're not as dangerous as everyone thinks you are." Before Naomi could respond, a shadow fell across their table. They looked up to find a black woman in her 40s standing there with an expression that managed to be both respectful and calculating. Her name was Lorraine Ice Mitchell, and she ran the most sophisticated drug distribution network inside Blackridge. She'd maintained her position for 6 years through a combination of business acumen and ruthless enforcement, and she didn't scare easily. "Naomi Cole," Ice said, her voice carrying the cadence of someone used to being obeyed. "We need to talk." "We're talking now," Naomi said. "Private conversation. My table." Ice gestured toward the far corner where her lieutenant sat watching. "It's important. I prefer to eat my breakfast here." Ice's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Not anger exactly, but a recalibration of approach. "I'm not Brenda Knox. I'm not trying to intimidate you or establish dominance. I'm offering you a business proposition." "I'm not interested in business. You haven't heard the proposition yet." "I don't need to." Naomi returned her attention to her breakfast. "Thank you for the offer, but I'm content with my current situation." For 3 long seconds, Ice stood there processing this rejection. In Blackridge's economy, her offers weren't declined. People who declined Ice Mitchell's offers usually reconsidered after their commissary orders went missing or their cell searches became suspiciously frequent. But something in Naomi's calm dismissal made Ice choose a different approach. "All right," she said slowly. "I respect that. But the offer stands if you change your mind. Protection, resources, whatever you need, my organization can provide it." "I'll remember that." Ice nodded once and walked away, leaving Margaret staring at Naomi with wide eyes. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" Margaret whispered urgently. "Ice Mitchell doesn't make offers to just anyone, and people don't turn her down." "I just did." "Yes? And now she's going to wonder why. She's going to start asking questions about who you are and what you want and why you're different from everyone else in here." Margaret set down her coffee cup with enough force to slosh liquid onto the table. "You're playing a very dangerous game, Naomi." "I'm not playing anything. I'm just trying to serve my time quietly." "That ship has sailed, honey. The moment you put Brenda Knox on the floor, quiet stopped being an option." The rest of breakfast passed without further incident, but Naomi felt the weight of attention following her like a physical presence. When she stood to leave, conversations paused. When she walked toward the exit, people moved out of her way with exaggerated care. The guards watched her progress with new interest, their body language suggesting they'd received instructions about her overnight. She was almost to the cafeteria door when someone stepped into her path. The woman was young, maybe 25, with the lean, coiled tension of someone who'd grown up fighting for survival. Her name was Diamond, and she'd earned her prison reputation through sheer viciousness in her first month inside. She had nothing to lose, which made her more dangerous than people twice her size. "You think you're special?" Diamond said, her voice pitched to carry across the cafeteria. "You think dropping one washed-up bitch makes you hard?" Naomi stopped walking but didn't respond. Around them, the cafeteria's attention sharpened. This was what Margaret had predicted. The inevitable test from someone young and foolish enough to seek reputation through confrontation. "I'm talking to you, library girl." Diamond stepped closer, invading Naomi's personal space with deliberate aggression. "You ain't nothing. You got lucky with Brenda, but luck runs out." "I don't want to fight you," Naomi said quietly. "Too bad." "Because I want to fight you." Diamond's hand moved toward her waistband, and Naomi's body tensed imperceptibly. In prison, that movement usually meant a weapon, a sharpened toothbrush, a razor blade taped to a piece of plastic, anything that could cut or stab. But before Diamond could pull whatever she had hidden, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Stand down, Diamond, now!" Everyone turned to find Ice Mitchell standing 10 feet away, her expression hard. 2 of her lieutenants flanked her, their body language making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. Diamond hesitated, her hand still at her waistband. "This ain't your business, Ice. Everything in this cafeteria is my business, and I'm telling you to stand down before you embarrass yourself." Ice's voice carried absolute authority. "Naomi Cole doesn't want to fight you. That's not weakness. That's mercy. Be smart enough to accept it." "You protecting her now?" Diamond's voice dripped with contempt. "Since when do you protect library girls?" "Since never. I'm protecting you." Ice moved closer, her voice dropping to a tone that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "You pull that shank you got hidden, and one of 2 things happens. Either the guards see it and you get 6 months in the SHU, or Naomi puts you down the way she put down Brenda. Either way, you lose. Walk away while you still can. The cafeteria watched this standoff with breathless attention. Diamond's pride warred with her survival instinct, her face showing the calculation happening behind her eyes. Finally, she stepped back, her hand leaving her waistband. "This ain't over," she said to Naomi. "It never started," Naomi replied. Diamond stalked away, her humiliation evident in every tense line of her body. The cafeteria slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though the energy had changed, not back to normal exactly, but to a new normal where Naomi Cole occupied a different position in the social hierarchy. Ice approached Naomi with measured steps. "You're welcome." "I didn't ask for your intervention." "No, you didn't, but you got it anyway." Ice studied her face. "You really would have let her pull that shank, wouldn't you? You would have let her commit to the attack before responding." "I prefer not to hurt people unless absolutely necessary." "That's interesting philosophy for someone with your skill set." Ice tilted her head slightly. "Makes me wonder what kind of life teaches someone to fight like you do, but think like a pacifist." "I'm not a pacifist, I'm just tired of violence." "Then you're in the wrong place, Naomi Cole, because violence is the only currency that matters in here." Ice turned to leave, then paused. "My offer still stands. When you decide you need allies, and you will, you know where to find me." She walked away, leaving Naomi standing alone in a cafeteria that was trying very hard to pretend it wasn't watching her every move. The walk to the library took her through C Block, where Brenda Knox's crew typically congregated. Naomi expected some kind of retaliation, a thrown object, verbal threats, maybe even a coordinated ambush. But what she found instead was worse. Nothing. Razor, Deshawn, and Carlotta were sitting in their usual spot near the tier entrance, and they watched Naomi pass with expressions that combined wariness with something that looked like respect. They didn't speak. They didn't move. They simply acknowledged her presence with nods that suggested the power dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Brenda Knox's empire had crumbled overnight, and the vultures were already circling to claim the territory she'd controlled. The library was Naomi's refuge, and she threw herself into her work with focused intensity. She cataloged new arrivals, helped inmates research their legal cases, and spent 2 hours teaching Jackie how to read a passage from the civil rights book they'd been working through together. Jackie was 43 years old, had dropped out of school in 6th grade, and was serving 12 years for drug trafficking. She approached learning with the earnest determination of someone who'd finally decided her life could be different. "What's this word?" Jackie asked, pointing to a line in the text. "Disenfranchised," Naomi said. "It means to be deprived of rights or privileges, especially the right to vote." "That's us, right? We're disenfranchised because we're felons." "In many states, yes, though some states have started restoring voting rights to people who've completed their sentences." Jackie read the next sentence slowly, her finger tracking under each word. "It says here that disenfranchisement was used to keep black people from voting even after slavery ended. That's messed up." "Yes, it is. You think anything's really changed?" Jackie looked up from the book, her eyes carrying the weight of lived experience. "I mean, we read all these books about civil rights and progress, but I'm in here for selling drugs while the people who flooded my neighborhood with those same drugs are in boardrooms making millions. Where's the justice in that?" It was the kind of question that had no easy answer, the kind that revealed the gap between ideals and reality. Naomi set down the book she'd been cataloging and gave Jackie her full attention. "Change is real," she said carefully, "but it's also incomplete and uneven. The civil rights movement achieved genuine victories. Legal segregation ended, voting rights expanded, opportunities opened that had been closed for generations. But those victories didn't dismantle all the systems that had been built on discrimination. Some of those systems just adapted, became more subtle, harder to see." "Like the war on drugs." "Like the war on drugs," Naomi agreed, "which disproportionately targets and punishes communities of color, while the underlying causes of drug use, poverty, trauma, lack of opportunity, remain largely unaddressed." Jackie was quiet for a moment, processing. "You talk like a teacher sometimes. You go to college." "I did. Long time ago." What'd you study? Naomi hesitated. Her actual education had been far more specialized than any university curriculum, but her cover story needed to be consistent. Criminal justice, actually. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. No shit. And now you're in here with the rest of us criminals. Jackie laughed, but there was no humor in it. What happened? Life happened, choices happened, circumstances I didn't handle as well as I should have. Naomi picked up the book again, redirecting the conversation. Let's continue reading. You're doing really well with this passage. They worked together for another hour before Jackie had to leave for her kitchen duty assignment. Naomi was reshelving books in the fiction section when Tamika appeared, moving with the restless energy that characterized everything she did. You got the whole prison talking, Tamika said without preamble. Guards are taking bets on who's going to test you next. Ice Mitchell is recruiting people to her crew by promising protection from you. And Brenda Knox's people are scattered like roaches when the lights come on. I'm aware. You aware that being famous in prison is the opposite of safe? Tamika perched on the edge of a reading table. I tried to tell you yesterday. Brenda was going to come for you. Now everyone's going to come for you. Not everyone, Naomi said. Most people will leave me alone because they don't want the confrontation. A few will test me, and when those tests fail, the rest will accept the new reality. You sound awfully confident about that. I'm realistic about human nature. People avoid unnecessary conflict when given the option. The only ones who won't avoid me are the ones who can't afford to. The ones whose reputation depends on challenging anyone who threatens their position. That's still a lot of people in a place like this. Tamika watched Naomi shelve books with mechanical precision. Can I ask you something personal? You can ask. I may not answer. Fair enough. Tamika took a breath. What did you do before you came here? And don't give me that manslaughter bullshit. Nobody defends themselves the way you did without serious training. Military? Police? What? Naomi turned to face her directly. Why does it matter? Because I'm trying to figure out if you're someone I should trust or someone I should avoid. Because I like you, Naomi, but I don't know you. And in here, not knowing someone can get you killed. It was honest, and Naomi appreciated honesty. I worked in private security, she said, which was technically true in the same way that an iceberg was technically frozen water, accurate but missing 90% of the relevant information. I learned self-defense as part of that job. When I was attacked by someone outside of work, I defended myself. The prosecution argued I used excessive force. The jury agreed. Private security, Tamika repeated slowly, like bodyguard stuff? Something like that. Must have been pretty high level to have the skills you showed last night. It was specialized work. Naomi returned to her shelving, signaling the conversation was approaching its limit. Is there something specific you need, Tamika? Or did you just come to interrogate me about my background? Little of both, Tamika admitted, but mostly I came to warn you. There's a woman named Iron Matron transferring here from Stateville Maximum next week. You heard of her? Naomi's hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing their task. I've heard the name? Then you know she's not like Brenda Knox or Diamond or any of these other pretenders. Iron Matron is the real deal. 23 years inside, killed 3 inmates and 2 guards, runs criminal operations from her cell that make Ice Mitchell's drug business look like a lemonade stand. Tamika's voice dropped. Word is she's being transferred here because she got too powerful at Stateville. Administration thought moving her would disrupt her network. Why are you telling me this? Because Iron Matron doesn't like competition. And whether you want it or not, you're competition now. The way you handled Brenda, that's the kind of skill that threatens someone like Iron Matron. Tamika stood up. Just thought you should know what's coming. She left before Naomi could respond, disappearing into the corridor with the same abrupt energy she'd arrived with. Naomi stood in the fiction section, a book in her hands, processing this new information. Iron Matron. Real name, Patricia Donnelly, 51 years old. Former mob enforcer who'd continued her work inside the prison system with such efficiency that she'd effectively become a contractor for hire. Someone inmates, and even some guards, paid to solve problems that required permanent solutions. Naomi had heard about her during her network briefings years ago, back when she was being trained on various threat profiles in the American prison system. The fact that Iron Matron was being transferred to Blackridge wasn't coincidence. Someone had arranged it, and that someone had timing that suggested they knew about Naomi's presence here. The network. They'd sent her a message offering her a contract. She'd refused, and now they were sending a message of a different kind. A reminder that refusing the network carried consequences, and those consequences might arrive in the form of a legendary killer who saw Naomi as a threat to be eliminated. Unless Naomi was being paranoid. Unless this transfer really was just routine administrative shuffling. No. She'd learned long ago that coincidence was just pattern recognition in disguise. The network was making a move, and she needed to decide how to respond. The library closed at 4:00 p.m., and Naomi returned to her cell for the evening count. She was locked in at 4:30, and the tier settled into its pre-dinner routine. Women calling to each other across the corridor, guards walking their rounds with bored efficiency. The television in the rec room playing a talk show. Nobody was really watching. Naomi sat on her bed and opened her notebook, adding new entries to her intelligence database. Iron Matron's transfer. Ice Mitchell's recruitment attempt. Diamond's failed challenge. Brenda Knox's broken empire. The network's likely involvement in current events. Each fact connected to others in ways that suggested patterns, and patterns suggested strategy. She was 3 pages into her analysis when Guard Davis appeared at her cell. "Cole, Warden wants to see you." This was unexpected. In 11 months, Naomi had never been summoned to the warden's office. Inmates only saw the warden for serious disciplinary issues or exceptional circumstances, and Naomi had carefully avoided both. "Now?" she asked. "Now," Davis confirmed. "Let's go." The walk to the administrative wing took them through parts of Blackridge that most inmates rarely saw: carpeted hallways with actual artwork on the walls, offices with real furniture instead of bolted-down institutional pieces, windows that didn't have bars. It was a reminder that the prison existed in layers, and the layer where the inmates lived was the furthest from anything resembling normal life. Warden Catherine Reeves was 58 years old, had run Blackridge for 12 years, and had a reputation for being firm but fair. She'd implemented educational programs that actually worked, had reduced violence through smart policy rather than increased punishment, and had managed to maintain order without resorting to the brutal tactics employed at other facilities. Inmates respected her even when they didn't like her, which was the best outcome any warden could hope for. She was sitting behind her desk when Davis escorted Naomi into the office, and her expression was difficult to read. Not angry exactly, but deeply concerned. "Sit down, Ms. Cole," Warden Reeves said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Thank you, Davis. Wait outside, please." Davis left, closing the door behind her. Naomi sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, her expression neutral. "Do you know why you're here?" Warden Reeves asked. "I can guess. I've read the reports from last night. 3 inmates claim Brenda Knox fell down the stairs. 7 other inmates claim they didn't see anything, and Brenda herself insists she tripped." Warden Reeves leaned forward. "But I know what really happened. I know you defended yourself against an attack. And I know you demonstrated a level of combat skill that has no business existing in a manslaughter convict." Naomi said nothing. "Here's my problem, Ms. Cole. In the 11 months you've been here, you've been a model inmate. No violations, no altercations, exemplary work performance in the library. My staff speaks highly of you. Other inmates don't complain about you. You've been exactly what this facility needs, someone who serves their time quietly and productively." Warden Reeves paused. "But now you've put the most violent woman in my prison in the infirmary, and the entire population is recalibrating their understanding of who you are and what you're capable of. That creates instability, and instability is dangerous." "I didn't seek the confrontation," Naomi said. "I tried to avoid it." "I believe you, but that doesn't change the outcome." The warden pulled a file from her desk drawer. "I've requested your full records from your previous facility and your trial. I want to understand who you really are, Ms. Cole, because the woman in these official files doesn't match the woman who dislocated Brenda Knox's shoulder without breaking a sweat. The woman in those files is exactly who I am, a person who made a mistake and is paying the legal consequence for that mistake. A mistake that involved killing a man with your bare hands, in self-defense. which you demonstrated with brutal efficiency last night. Warden Reeves closed the file. I'm not here to retry your case. I'm here to maintain order in my facility. And right now, you represent a threat to that order. Not because of what you've done, but because of what everyone thinks you might do. What do you want from me? I want you to go back to being invisible. I want you to avoid conflicts, decline challenges, and give me no reason to take administrative action against you. The warden's voice softened slightly. I also want you to be careful, Ms. Cole, because the kind of attention you're attracting now, that's the kind that gets people hurt. And despite what happened last night, I don't believe you want to hurt anyone. I don't. Then help me keep you safe by keeping you out of situations where violence becomes necessary. Warden Reeves stood, signaling the meeting was over. One more thing. Patricia Donnelly is being transferred here next week. I'm sure you've heard the rumors by now. I have. Ms. Donnelly is a unique challenge. She has connections outside these walls, she runs operations inside them, and she's exceptionally dangerous to anyone she perceives as a threat. The warden walked around her desk. I'm telling you this because I want you to avoid her at all costs. Don't engage. Don't respond to provocations. Don't give her any reason to focus her attention on you. Do you understand? I understand. Good. Davis will take you back to your cell. The return walk was silent. Davis didn't ask questions, and Naomi didn't volunteer information. When they reached her cell, Davis unlocked the door and stepped back. For what it's worth, Davis said quietly, I'm glad you're okay. Brenda Knox has hurt a lot of women in here. Maybe now she'll think twice. Thank you, Naomi said. She stepped into her cell and the door locked behind her with its familiar metallic click. Dinner would arrive in an hour, delivered to the cells since evening meals happened during lockdown. Until then, she was alone with her thoughts and the weight of decisions that were cascading toward an inevitable confrontation. The network had made its move. Iron Matron was coming. And Naomi was running out of places to hide from a past that had decided her peaceful prison sentence was no longer convenient. She picked up her notebook and added one final entry for the day. The silence is ending. The notebook entry stared back at her in the dim light of her cell, and Naomi felt the familiar weight of inevitability settling onto her shoulders like a physical burden. She'd spent 3 years trying to outrun her past, and now that past was walking through Blackridge's gates in the form of Patricia Donnelly, a woman whose reputation was built on bodies that would never be found and problems that simply ceased to exist. 7 days. That's how long she had before Iron Matron arrived. Dinner came and went. Naomi ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind running through scenarios and contingencies with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years planning operations where a single mistake meant death. The difference was that in her old life, she'd had resources, backup, and exit strategies. Here, she had a library job in the 4 concrete walls of a cell that locked from the outside. The next morning arrived with frost on the windows and a tension in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. Naomi went through her routine with the same precision she always maintained, but she could feel the shift in how the prison moved around her. Women who'd never noticed her before now watched with calculating eyes. Conversation stopped when she approached, then resumed in hushed tones after she passed. Even the guards seemed to be repositioning themselves, creating distance or closing gaps depending on their individual assessment of what she represented. The cafeteria was half empty when she arrived for breakfast, which was unusual for a Wednesday. Then she saw why. Most of the population had congregated near the windows on the far side, their attention focused on something in the courtyard beyond. Naomi collected her tray and moved toward an empty table, but the crowd's energy pulled her attention toward the windows, despite her intention to remain uninvolved. They're setting up for Iron Matron, a voice said beside her. Naomi turned to find Ice Mitchell standing there with a coffee cup in her hands. Reinforced transport, 8 guards instead of the usual 4, and a direct route to administrative segregation. They're not taking any chances with her. She doesn't arrive for another week, Naomi said. Official transfer date is next Tuesday. But the administration is preparing now because Patricia Donnelly doesn't travel light. She brings complications. Ice took a sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving Naomi's face. You know what's interesting? In the 3 years she's been at Stateville Maximum, Iron Matron has killed 2 people who had skills similar to yours. One was a former Spetsnaz operative doing life for espionage. The other was a retired CIA field agent serving time for a botched Black Ops mission. Both were professional killers. Both died in their cells from what the reports called natural causes. Why are you telling me this? Because I run a business, and good business requires accurate information. And the information I'm getting suggests that Iron Matron's transfer here isn't coincidence, it's targeting. Ice set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. Someone wants you two in the same facility. Question is whether they want you to kill each other or work together. I'm not working with anyone, Naomi said quietly. And I'm not killing anyone. I'm serving my sentence and going home in 12 years. Noble plan. Probably won't survive first contact with reality, but I admire the optimism. Ice glanced around the cafeteria, noting the attention they were attracting. Last chance, Naomi. Join my organization. I can provide protection, resources, and most importantly, I can make sure you and Iron Matron never end up in the same space at the same time. My people control enough of the daily schedules to make that happen. And in exchange? In exchange, you occasionally handle problems that require your particular skill set. Nothing lethal. I'm not asking you to kill for me. But there are situations where having someone with your capabilities on call would be extremely valuable to my operation. Naomi studied Ice's face, reading the genuine calculation happening behind those sharp eyes. The offer was real, and it was probably the smart play from a pure survival standpoint. Ice Mitchell had power, resources, and the kind of institutional knowledge that could make prison life significantly easier. But accepting would mean stepping back into the world Naomi had deliberately left behind, the world where violence was currency and moral compromise was the cost of staying alive. No, Naomi said. Thank you for the offer, but my answer remains no. Something flickered across Ice's face. Not anger, but a kind of resigned respect. You're either incredibly principled or incredibly stupid. I genuinely can't tell which. Maybe both. Yeah, maybe both. Ice picked up her coffee. Offer expires when Iron Matron walks through those gates. After that, you're on your own, and I won't be able to help you even if I wanted to. She walked away, leaving Naomi standing alone with a breakfast tray she no longer wanted. The crowd at the windows had grown larger, and their energy had shifted from curiosity to something darker. Anticipation mixed with fear, the collective awareness that something fundamental was about to change in Blackridge's ecosystem. Naomi forced herself to eat, to maintain the routine that had kept her grounded for 11 months. But the food tasted like cardboard, and every bite required conscious effort to swallow. She was halfway through her meal when Tamika dropped into the seat across from her, moving with the jittery energy of someone running on too much caffeine and too little sleep. You talked to Ice, Tamika said without preamble. Everyone saw you talking to Ice. Please tell me you took her offer. I didn't. Jesus Christ, Naomi, why not? Tamika's voice carried genuine distress. You know what's coming. You know what Iron Matron does to people. Ice was offering you a way out. Ice was offering me a different cage. I've spent enough of my life in cages I didn't build myself. That's poetic bullshit, and you know it. This isn't about principles. This is about survival. Tamika leaned forward, lowering her voice. I've been asking around about Patricia Donnelly. The stories I'm hearing. Naomi, she's not like Brenda Knox. She's not some prison bully who gets off on intimidation. She's a professional. She kills people for money. And she's so good at it that she's been doing it from inside maximum security for over a decade. I know what she is. Then you know you can't handle this alone. You need allies. You need protection. I need to finish my breakfast and get to the library, Naomi interrupted gently. Thank you for caring, Tamika. I mean that. But I've made my decision. Tamika stared at her for a long moment, frustration and concern warring across her young face. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, but I'll do it on my terms. The library provided temporary sanctuary from the prison's escalating tension. Naomi threw herself into her work with focused intensity, cataloging new arrivals, helping inmates with research requests, and spending an hour teaching Jackie a new chapter in their civil rights book. But even here, in the quiet space she'd claimed as her own, the whispers followed her. That's her, she heard someone murmur to a companion. That's the one who put Brenda Knox in the infirmary. Doesn't look that dangerous. That's what makes her scary. The conversation circled around her like vultures, never quite landing, but never quite leaving either. By lunchtime, Naomi's nerves were frayed in ways they hadn't been since her first week inside Blackridge. She skipped lunch entirely, choosing instead to remain in the library during the break period, reshelving books that didn't need reshelving and organizing sections that were already organized. Hiding won't help. Naomi turned to find Margaret Holloway standing in the doorway, her expression carrying the concerned maternal energy that seemed to be her default setting. The older woman walked into the library and closed the door behind her, which was technically against the rules, but happened often enough that the guards rarely enforced it. "I'm not hiding," Naomi said. "I'm working." "You're avoiding the cafeteria, which means you're avoiding the questions everyone wants to ask you." Margaret sat down at one of the reading tables. "People are scared, honey. Not just of Iron Matron coming, but of you. They don't know what to make of someone who can take down Brenda Knox without breaking a sweat, and then spend the next week reshelving books like nothing happened." "What do you want me to do? Give a press conference explaining my background?" "I want you to understand that mystery creates speculation, and speculation creates fear, and fear in a place like this creates violence." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "You've been quiet for 11 months, but quiet isn't going to work anymore. People need to know where you stand." "I stand alone. Same place I've always stood." "That's not sustainable. I need everyone to leave me alone and let me serve my sentence in peace," Naomi interrupted, her voice carrying an edge of frustration that surprised both of them. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want to fight Brenda Knox. I don't want to fight Iron Matron. I don't want to join Ice Mitchell's organization or become some prison legend or play politics with people's lives. I just want to do my time and go home." Margaret was quiet for a moment, absorbing this outburst. "What did you do before you came here? And don't tell me private security. Nobody learns to fight like you did in any legitimate security job." Naomi sat down across from her, suddenly exhausted by the weight of maintaining a cover story that was growing thinner by the day. "What difference does it make?" "It makes a difference because I'm trying to help you, and I can't help if I don't understand what I'm dealing with." Margaret reached across the table, not quite touching Naomi's hand, but close enough to bridge the distance. "I've been inside 7 years. I've seen a lot of women come through here, victims, criminals, survivors, everything in between. But you're different. You move different, think different, see the world different, and that difference is going to get you killed unless you let someone help you navigate what's coming." The sincerity in Margaret's voice broke through Naomi's defenses in ways that threats and offers never could. She looked at this woman who had no reason to care about her well-being, who gained nothing from offering support, who was risking social capital just by sitting here having this conversation. "I worked for people who solved problems that couldn't be solved through legal channels," Naomi said slowly, choosing each word with care. "I was very good at what I did, but I got tired of it. Tired of the violence, tired of the moral compromises, tired of being a tool for people I didn't respect. So I tried to get out. The job that brought me here was supposed to be my last one. It went wrong in ways I couldn't have predicted, and I made choices that led to a man's death. I accepted responsibility for those choices, and that's why I'm serving 15 years. Margaret listened without interruption, her face showing understanding rather than judgment. "And now the people you used to work for want you back." "I think so. I'm not certain, but the timing of Iron Matron's transfer is suspicious." "What happens if you refuse them?" "In my experience, people like that don't accept refusal well. They apply pressure until you either comply or become a liability they need to eliminate. And Iron Matron is the pressure. Iron Matron is the message. Work for us or die trying to avoid us." Naomi stood and walked to the window, looking out at the courtyard where frost still clung to the chain-link fence. "The problem is that I meant what I said to Ice Mitchell. I'm done with that life. I'd rather die here as myself than survive as the person they want me to be." "That's very noble, also very stupid." "I've been getting that a lot lately." Margaret joined her at the window, both women staring out at the cold landscape beyond the glass. "What if there's a third option? What if you don't have to work for them or die fighting them?" "I'm listening." "What if you expose them? Whatever organization you worked for, they're operating in the shadows because light is dangerous to them. Bring that light. Talk to your lawyer, talk to the authorities, trade information for protection. Naomi shook her head. The people I worked for have connections at every level. Law enforcement, intelligence agencies, private sector, government. They've spent decades building networks that protect them from exactly that kind of exposure. If I start talking, I won't survive long enough to testify. Not even with witness protection? Especially not with witness protection. These people have killed witnesses in WITSEC before. It's difficult, but not impossible, and I'm not valuable enough to justify the extraordinary measures it would take to keep me truly safe. They stood in silence for a moment, both women grappling with the apparent impossibility of Naomi's situation. Then Margaret spoke again, her voice thoughtful. What about going public? Not through official channels, but through media. If your story gets enough attention, enough visibility, it becomes much harder to make you disappear quietly. That only works if I have evidence. Without documentation, I'm just a convicted killer making wild accusations about a shadowy organization that officially doesn't exist. Do you have evidence? Naomi thought about the notebook in her cell, the careful record she'd maintained over years of operations, the details she'd memorized because documentation was dangerous, but forgetting was worse. She thought about the names, dates, and locations that existed nowhere but in her memory, information that could unravel operations spanning 3 continents if it fell into the right hands. I have information, she said carefully. Whether it counts as evidence is debatable. Before Margaret could respond, the library door opened and Guard Davis stepped inside, her expression serious. Cole, Warden wants to see you again. Now. The walk to the administrative wing felt longer this time, each step carrying Naomi closer to whatever new complication had emerged. Davis remained silent, which suggested the matter was serious enough that even casual conversation felt inappropriate. When they reached Warden Reeves's office, Davis knocked twice and opened the door. The warden wasn't alone. Sitting across from her desk was a man in his mid-50s wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in the institutional setting. He had the kind of face that was deliberately forgettable. Average height, average build, brown hair going gray at the temples, features that wouldn't stand out in any crowd. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, and they fixed on Naomi with an intensity that made her body tense instinctively. Ms. Cole, Warden Reeves said, gesturing to an empty chair. This is Special Agent Chen from the FBI. He has some questions for you. Naomi sat down slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. The FBI's involvement could mean many things, none of them good. Had they connected her to her previous work? Had the network been exposed? Or was this about something else entirely? Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Cole, Agent Chen said, his voice carrying the neutral professionalism of someone trained to reveal nothing through tone. I understand you're serving 15 years for voluntary manslaughter. That's correct. And you maintain that you acted in self-defense when you killed Marcus Webb. The use of her victim's name was deliberate, designed to provoke a reaction. Naomi kept her expression neutral. The jury disagreed with that assessment. I've accepted their verdict. Have you? Agent Chen pulled a folder from his briefcase. Because your behavior since incarceration suggests someone with highly specialized training. The incident with Brenda Knox last week, for instance. According to multiple witness statements, you neutralized a violent attack without landing a single strike. That's not typical self-defense. That's professional-level defensive tactics. I learned self-defense as part of my previous employment. Private security work, according to your file. Agent Chen opened the folder. But I can't find any record of you being licensed as a security professional in any state. No firearms permits, no private investigator credentials, no corporate security employment history. For someone who worked in private security, you left remarkably few footprints. I worked for a small firm that handled discreet clients. We maintained low profiles by design. What was the firm's name? It's been 3 years. I don't remember. You don't remember the name of your employer? Agent Chen's tone suggested he didn't believe her for a second. How about your supervisor's name, your coworkers? Any contracts you worked on? I invoked my right to remain silent during my trial. I'm invoking that same right now. The agent studied her face for a long moment, and Naomi could see the frustration building behind his professional mask. He'd come here expecting a frightened inmate who could be pressured into cooperation, and instead he'd found someone who understood exactly how interrogations worked and how to resist them. Let me be direct, Ms. Cole. We know you're not who you claim to be. We know your background involves activities that go far beyond private security work. And we know that Patricia Donnelly's transfer to this facility represents a credible threat to your life. Agent Chen leaned forward. What we don't know is why someone with your skill set ended up in prison for what should have been a clear case of self-defense, unless you weren't defending yourself, unless you were on a job that went wrong. Naomi said nothing. Here's what I'm offering. Cooperation in exchange for protection. Tell us who you really worked for, what operations you were involved in, and what you know about the network that's currently trying to either recruit or eliminate you. In exchange, we'll relocate you to a federal facility with genuine security, and we'll reopen your case with an eye toward reduced sentencing. It was a good offer, probably the best offer she was going to get under the circumstances. But it came with complications that Agent Chen either didn't understand or was deliberately ignoring. If I talk to you, I'm dead within a month, Naomi said quietly. The people you're asking me to inform on have sources inside federal law enforcement. They'll know about our conversation before you leave the parking lot, and then I'll have an accident or develop a sudden health crisis or simply disappear during a transfer. You can't protect me because you don't know what you're protecting me from. No, you can't. Naomi's voice carried absolute certainty. I appreciate the offer, Agent Chen, but unless you're prepared to put me in complete isolation with zero contact with anyone outside a team of agents you've personally vetted for compromised loyalties, your protection is meaningless. And even then, the organization I worked for has demonstrated the patience and resources to wait years for an opportunity to eliminate threats. Agent Chen's expression shifted, revealing genuine concern beneath his professional facade. You're describing a conspiracy that would require massive coordination across multiple agencies and jurisdictions. I'm describing reality based on personal experience. Believe it or don't, that's your choice. But I'm not trading information for false promises of safety. Warden Reeves had been silent throughout this exchange, but now she spoke up. Agent Chen, I think we're done here. Ms. Cole has made her position clear. Warden, this woman is sitting on information that could. This woman is an inmate in my facility, and I won't allow her to be pressured into decisions that could endanger her life. Warden Reeves stood, her body language making it clear the meeting was over. If the FBI wants to pursue this investigation, you'll need to go through proper channels and obtain appropriate court orders. Until then, Ms. Cole is under my jurisdiction, and I'm exercising my authority to end this interview. Agent Chen looked like he wanted to argue, but years of working within bureaucratic systems had taught him to recognize when a fight was unwinnable. He closed his folder and stood, pulling a business card from his jacket pocket. If you change your mind, he said, handing the card to Naomi, call me. Day or night, the offer stands. Naomi took the card without comment. Agent Chen left, his frustration evident in the set of his shoulders. When the door closed behind him, Warden Reeves sat back down and let out a long breath. What the hell have you gotten yourself into, Ms. Cole? Nothing I can explain without putting other people at risk. That's not reassuring. The warden rubbed her temples. The FBI doesn't send special agents to interview inmates about bar fights gone wrong. Whatever Agent Chen thinks you know, it's serious enough to justify resources and time, which means you're carrying information that powerful people want. I'm carrying scars from a life I left behind, Naomi said. The information died with that life. Information doesn't die. It just gets buried until someone digs it up. Warden Reeves fixed Naomi with a hard stare. Here's my problem. I run a facility with limited resources and overwhelming challenges. I can't dedicate special protection to one inmate just because she has a complicated past, but I also can't ignore credible threats to the safety of people in my custody. What are you saying? I'm saying that when Patricia Donnelly arrives next Tuesday, I'm placing both of you in administrative segregation for evaluation. Separate cells, separate schedules, no contact. It's the best I can do with the resources I have. That won't stop what's coming. Maybe not, but it might delay it long enough for you to reconsider Agent Chen's offer. The warden stood. Davis will take you back to your cell. I suggest you spend the next few days thinking very carefully about your options, Ms. Cole, because your current plan of doing nothing and hoping for the best isn't a survival strategy. It's a death wish. The return walk to her cell happened in silence. Davis locked her in without comment, and Naomi sat on her bed staring at Agent Chen's business card. The embossed letters spelled out his name, title, and contact information with bureaucratic precision, and in her hands, it felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. She could call him. She could trade everything she knew about the network for protection that might or might not work. She could become a witness, an informant, a problem for powerful people who solve problems with extreme prejudice. Or she could maintain her silence, serve her sentence, and hope that Iron Matron's arrival was really just coincidence rather than orchestrated threat. Or she could find a third option that nobody had considered yet. Naomi pulled out her notebook and began writing, filling pages with possibilities, scenarios, and strategies that had nothing to do with fighting or running or cooperating. She wrote until her hand cramped and the dinner tray arrived through the slot in her door. She ate without tasting the food, her mind working through problems that had no easy solutions. She was still writing when lights out came at 10 p.m., and she continued in the darkness by the faint illumination from the corridor lights, her handwriting growing smaller and more cramped as she documented everything she remembered about network operations, personnel, and procedures. If she was going to go down, she was taking the insurance with her. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended animation where every moment felt simultaneously too fast and too slow. Naomi maintained her routine: library work, tutoring sessions with Jackie, brief conversations with Margaret and Tamika. But underneath the surface, normalcy. Tension wound tighter with each passing hour. The prison population could feel it too. Conversations carried an edge of anticipation. Arguments escalated faster than usual. Guards walked their rounds with hands closer to their equipment, bodies tense with the awareness that something was building toward an inevitable release. On Sunday evening, Naomi was locked in her cell when she heard footsteps approaching. Multiple people, moving with purpose. She set down the book she'd been reading and stood as 3 guards appeared outside her door. "Cole, pack your things. You're being moved." "Moved where?" Naomi asked, though she already knew the answer. "Administrative segregation. Warden's orders. You've got 10 minutes." She packed methodically, folding her few possessions into the mesh bag she'd been issued when she arrived at Blackridge. 3 books from the library. Her notebook, which she tucked into the bottom of the bag where casual inspection wouldn't find it. The photo of her sister. The letters she'd received over the past year. Agent Chen's business card, which she'd kept despite her better judgment. Everything fit in one bag because she'd learned long ago that anything you couldn't carry wasn't worth having. The walk to administrative segregation took them through empty corridors. The general population was locked down for the evening, and the facility felt like a ghost town populated only by guards and the occasional glimpse of faces watching through cell windows. They descended a flight of stairs that Naomi had never accessed before, moving into the section of Blackridge reserved for inmates who required separation from the general population for disciplinary or protective reasons. The cells here were different, smaller, more isolated, with solid doors that had observation windows rather than bars. They stopped at cell A7, and the guard unlocked the door with the kind of practiced efficiency that came from performing the same action thousands of times. "Inside," she said. "Warden will brief you tomorrow on the conditions of your segregation." Naomi stepped into the cell. The door closed behind her with a heavy metallic thunk that sounded nothing like the familiar clang of her regular cell. She set down her bag and surveyed her new accommodation. A bed bolted to the wall, a toilet, a sink, a small metal desk, and exactly 4 feet of floor space for movement. This was protection and punishment simultaneously, safety and isolation combined into 8 feet by 6 feet of concrete and steel. She sat on the bed and pulled out her notebook, adding a new entry to her record. Day 1 in administrative segregation. Protection or cage. Difference is semantic. Iron Matron arrives in 48 hours. The silence is ending, and I still don't know if I'm the predator or the prey. Outside her door, the prison settled into its nighttime rhythm. But Naomi sat awake in the darkness, counting down the hours until Patricia Donnelly walked through Blackridge's gates, and the careful balance she'd maintained for 11 months shattered completely. The hours stretched into an eternity measured in heartbeats, and the distant sounds of a prison that never truly slept. Naomi had experienced isolation before. It was part of her training, part of the psychological conditioning that had made her effective in her previous life. But this felt different. This wasn't chosen solitude or tactical preparation. This was waiting for a storm she could see forming on the horizon but couldn't prevent from arriving. Morning came with the mechanical sound of a food slot opening and a breakfast tray sliding through. No guard interaction, no morning count in the corridor, no ambient noise of other inmates starting their day. Just silence broken only by the ventilation system and the occasional echo of footsteps from somewhere above. Naomi ate without appetite, forcing down the lukewarm oatmeal and bitter coffee because maintaining physical capability required fuel regardless of stress. She was setting the empty tray back in the slot when she heard something that made her freeze. Voices in the corridor, speaking in tones too low to make out words, but carrying an urgency that suggested something significant was happening. The observation window in her door was small, maybe 8 inches square, positioned at eye level. Naomi moved to it and peered out, angling her vision to see as much of the corridor as possible. 3 guards stood 20 feet away, their body language tense, radios crackling with communications she couldn't quite hear. Then one of them turned, and Naomi saw his expression. The particular combination of fear and professional composure that meant something had gone very wrong. The radio transmission suddenly became clear as one guard turned up the volume. Confirmed arrival, Gate 3. Subject is non-compliant with standard processing procedures. What's the nature of the non-compliance? She's refusing to be cuffed, says the restraints are unnecessary and degrading. She's just standing there, not moving, not threatening, but won't comply with intake protocol. A pause, then a different voice, older and carrying authority. How many guards on scene? 8 plus the transport team. 8 guards and she's refusing restraints? Get the warden down there now. And get the crisis response team ready in case this escalates. The guards in the corridor exchanged glances, then moved quickly toward the stairs, leaving Naomi alone with the knowledge that Patricia Donnelly had arrived ahead of schedule and was already making it clear that normal rules didn't apply to her. 43 minutes later, Naomi counted every one. She heard new footsteps approaching her cell. The observation window's cover slid open from the outside, and Warden Reeves's face appeared. "Miss Cole, I need you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you." "I'm listening." Patricia Donnelly arrived this morning approximately 90 minutes ahead of the scheduled transfer time. She's currently in intake processing, and she's been asking about you specifically. Warden Reeves's voice was carefully controlled, but Naomi could hear the tension underneath. She knows you're here. She knows you're in administrative segregation, and she's made it very clear that she wants a conversation. How did she know I was here at all? That's an excellent question that I'm currently investigating. But right now I need to know if you have any information that would explain why a maximum security inmate being transferred from another facility would have detailed knowledge about another inmate she's never met. Naomi considered her options. The truth would require explanations she wasn't ready to provide. A lie would be transparent. Silence would confirm suspicions without providing useful information. "We've never met," she said carefully. "But we may have worked in similar circles before our respective incarcerations. Professional reputation travels in certain communities." "Professional reputation," Warden Reeves repeated flatly. "Ms. Cole, Patricia Donnelly is a contract killer with 23 years inside for crimes that would make most hardened criminals sick. What kind of professional circles would put you in contact with someone like that?" "The kind I left behind when I came here." The warden was silent for a moment, and Naomi could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. She was trying to decide how much she needed to know versus how much she wanted to know, balancing institutional security against the uncomfortable truth that some questions led to answers that created more problems than they solved. "I'm keeping you separated," Warden Reeves said finally. "Donnelly is being placed in cell A1, which is at the opposite end of this wing. You'll have different yard times, different shower schedules, different everything. As far as this facility is concerned, you two don't exist in the same space. That won't stop her. It will if my guards do their jobs correctly. With respect, Warden, if Patricia Donnelly wants to have a conversation with me, your guards won't be able to prevent it. The best they can do is delay it. And delays just give her time to plan something more elaborate." Warden Reeves's expression hardened. "Are you telling me you want to meet with her?" I'm telling you that pretending we can avoid each other indefinitely is unrealistic. She didn't get transferred here by accident, and she didn't ask about me out of casual curiosity. Whatever's happening, it's going to happen whether we facilitate it or try to prevent it. So what do you suggest? Naomi moved closer to the observation window, lowering her voice even though there was no one nearby to overhear. Controlled contact. A conversation in a monitored space with guards present. Let her say whatever she came here to say, let me respond, and then we both go back to our cells. It satisfies her need for contact without creating the chaos that comes from her finding alternative methods. You want me to arrange a meeting between two of the most dangerous inmates in my facility. I want you to acknowledge reality and manage it rather than denying it exists and hoping for the best. The warden stared at her through the small window, and for a long moment Naomi thought she would refuse outright. Then she stepped back from the door. I'll consider it, but if I agree to this, it happens on my terms, in my space, with my people present. And if anything goes wrong, both of you will spend the rest of your sentences in isolation so complete you'll forget what other human beings look like. Are we clear? Crystal clear. The observation window cover slid closed, and Naomi heard the warden's footsteps receding down the corridor. She sat on her bed and tried to process what had just happened. In less than 2 hours, Iron Matron had arrived, disrupted standard procedures, and forced the administration into reactive mode. That was professional-level tactical thinking. Create chaos, establish unpredictability, and make everyone around you operate from a position of defensive uncertainty. The network had trained Naomi in similar techniques. She recognized the playbook because she'd used it herself in previous operations. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Lunch arrived through the slot. An hour of recreation time in a small enclosed yard where she was the only inmate present. Dinner through the slot. The sun set beyond the small window in her cell, painting the concrete walls in shades of orange and gray before darkness settled in completely. Naomi was lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling and counting the patterns in the concrete, when she heard it. A voice, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere in the ventilation system. Naomi Cole, can you hear me? She sat up slowly, locating the source of the sound. The air vent near the ceiling was old, institutional grade, and apparently connected to a network of ducts that ran throughout the administrative segregation wing. I can hear you, Naomi said quietly, directing her voice toward the vent. Good. We need to talk, you and I. Professional to professional. The voice was female, mature, carrying the kind of confidence that came from decades of controlling environments through force of will. Patricia Donnelly, Iron Matron, speaking to her through ventilation ducts like teenagers passing notes in class, except the stakes were considerably higher. I'm listening, Naomi said. The network sends its regards. They're very disappointed in your refusal to accept their generous offer of renewed employment. I'm sure they'll survive the disappointment. A low chuckle echoed through the vent. I like you already. Most people get nervous when I introduce myself, but you're just sitting there in your cell having a casual conversation with a woman who's killed more people than you've probably met in your entire life. Fear is a choice. I choose not to waste energy on it. Spoken like someone with genuine training. Tell me, Naomi, and I'm genuinely curious, what made you think you could just walk away from the network? That's not how this works. That's not how this has ever worked. I completed my contract. I served my time. The terms were fulfilled. No, sweetheart, you broke the rules. You turned yourself in. You exposed yourself to law enforcement scrutiny. You created a situation where powerful people had to scramble to ensure you didn't talk. Patricia's voice carried a lecturing quality, like a teacher explaining basic concepts to a slow student. The network invested significant resources in your training. You're not a person to them. You're an asset. And assets don't retire unless the organization decides they're no longer useful. Then I guess I'm no longer useful. Oh, you're still useful. That's why I'm here. That's why they sent me specifically. A pause, then Patricia's voice changed tone, becoming almost conversational. They want you back, Naomi. They want you active, operational, and earning your keep. And they've authorized me to make you an offer you'll actually consider. I already refused their offer. You refused a piece of paper delivered by a lawyer who couldn't possibly convey the full scope of what's being proposed. I'm here to provide clarification. The sound of movement came through the vent, as if Patricia was settling into a more comfortable position in her own cell. Here's what they're offering: full exoneration of your current sentence through channels they control, relocation to any country of your choosing with a new identity, and a signing bonus of $2 million deposited in an account that exists outside any government's ability to freeze or monitor. Despite herself, Naomi felt a flicker of surprise. That was significantly more than the network typically offered for recruitment. They wanted her badly enough to put real resources on the table. And in exchange, she asked, in exchange, you go back to work. 5 contracts per year for the next 3 years, targets of your choosing from their priority list, payment of $500,000 per successful completion. After 3 years, you can retire with their blessing and their protection. You'd be 30% wealthier and completely free of this cage. You're forgetting something important. What's that? I don't want to kill people anymore. I don't want to be the person who solves problems through violence. I don't want to live in shadows and lie about who I am, and wake up every morning wondering if today is the day someone decides I know too much and need to be eliminated. Naomi's voice was quiet, but carried absolute conviction. I'd rather serve 15 years in here as myself than spend 3 years out there as someone I hate. Silence from the vent. Then Patricia spoke again, and her voice had changed, still controlled, but with an edge that suggested genuine respect. That's either the most principled thing I've ever heard or the most naive. I genuinely can't tell which. I've been getting that a lot lately. Here's the problem with your noble stance, Naomi. The network doesn't accept refusal. They didn't send me here just to make you an offer. They sent me here to give you a choice. Patricia's voice hardened. Work for them willingly and get everything I just described. Refuse, and they've authorized me to eliminate you as a potential liability and a bad example to other assets who might be considering early retirement. There it was, the threat underneath the offer, the violence beneath the veneer of negotiation. Naomi had expected it, had planned for it, but hearing it stated so plainly still sent a chill down her spine. So you're here to kill me if I say no. I'm here to solve a problem. Whether that solution involves your cooperation or your elimination depends entirely on the choice you make. Patricia paused. For what it's worth, I hope you choose cooperation. I respect competence, and you're clearly competent. It would be a waste to kill someone with your skills over something as abstract as principles. When do I need to give you my answer? You've got 72 hours, 3 days to think about whether your principles are worth dying for. The sound of movement again, then Patricia's voice one final time. I'll be seeing you soon, Naomi Cole, one way or another. The ventilation system went silent, except for the normal flow of air. Naomi sat in her cell, processing the conversation she'd just had with a woman who'd been sent specifically to recruit or murder her. 72 hours, 3 days to decide between freedom purchased with blood or death defended by principle. She pulled out her notebook and began writing, documenting every word of the conversation while it was still fresh in her memory. Then she moved to a new page and began listing options, analyzing probabilities, calculating risks. Option 1. Accept the offer. Leave Blackridge, return to killing, spend 3 years as the person she'd tried so hard to stop being. Pros: survival, freedom, financial security. Cons: moral compromise, return to violence, 3 more years of living in fear and shadow, no guarantee the network wouldn't eliminate her anyway once she'd served her usefulness. Option 2. Refuse the offer and prepare to defend herself against Iron Matron's assassination attempt. Pros: maintained principles, stayed true to herself, died as the person she wanted to be. Cons: death, failure to serve her full sentence, no opportunity to rebuild a life outside prison, no chance to see her sister again. Option 3. Contact Agent Chen, trade information about the network for protection, become a federal witness. Pros: potential sentence reduction, government protection, opportunity to damage the organization that was threatening her. Cons: questionable effectiveness of protection, high probability of network retaliation, life spent looking over her shoulder, loss of control over her own fate. Option 4. Find a way to neutralize the threat that didn't involve cooperation, death, or becoming an informant. She stared at that last option for a long time, trying to imagine what it could possibly look like. How did someone neutralize a threat from a woman like Patricia Donnelly without violence? How did someone defeat an organization with unlimited resources and no moral boundaries without either joining them or exposing them to authorities? The answer came to her slowly, building piece by piece as she worked through the logic of her situation. The network wanted her alive and working or dead and silent. Those were the only two outcomes they'd planned for, which meant any third outcome would disrupt their calculations and force them into reactive mode. What if she gave them neither compliance nor martyrdom? What if she found a way to make herself simultaneously too valuable to kill and too problematic to employ? The idea was risky, possibly insane, and would require perfect execution under extremely hostile conditions. But it was the only option that preserved both her life and her principles. Naomi began writing faster, filling pages with detailed planning that drew on every skill she'd developed over years of operations. She worked through the night, refining the plan, identifying weaknesses, building contingencies. By the time dawn light began filtering through her cell window, she had a strategy that might, just possibly, work. Morning came with the usual breakfast tray, but this time it was accompanied by Guard Davis's voice through the observation window. "Cole? Warden wants to see you in 30 minutes. Wear your jumpsuit and be ready to be escorted." "Understood," Naomi said. She ate quickly, used the toilet, and was standing ready when Davis returned with two other guards. They cuffed her hands in front, a sign of respect, since violent inmates were cuffed behind their backs, and escorted her through the administrative segregation wing toward the meeting room she'd been to twice before. But when they arrived, the room had been transformed. The furniture had been rearranged to create two separate areas divided by a clear partition. Guards stood at every corner. Warden Reeves sat at a desk positioned to observe both sections. And in the far section, sitting with perfect posture and an expression of mild amusement, was Patricia Donnelly. Iron Matron looked nothing like Naomi had expected. She wasn't physically imposing, maybe 5'6", slender build, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun. She could have been someone's grandmother, a retired teacher, a librarian. Only her eyes revealed the truth. They were flat, emotionless, carrying the absolute certainty of someone who'd spent decades making life-and-death decisions and sleeping perfectly well afterward. "Ms. Cole," Warden Reeves said, "Ms. Donnelly has requested this meeting, and I've agreed to facilitate it under strict conditions. You will remain on opposite sides of the partition. You will not attempt physical contact. You will keep your voices at conversational volume. Any violation of these rules results in immediate termination of the meeting and additional disciplinary consequences. Are we clear?" "Yes, Warden," Naomi said. "Crystal," Patricia added, her voice carrying that same amused tone. Naomi was escorted to her section and seated in a chair that had been bolted to the floor. The guards removed her handcuffs but remained positioned to respond instantly if she made any threatening movement. Across the partition, Patricia sat in an identical setup, her hands folded peacefully in her lap. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me," Patricia said, as if they were having tea instead of a conversation about murder and coercion. "I find face-to-face communication so much more productive than shouting through ventilation ducts." "You wanted to talk. I'm listening. Straight to business. I appreciate that." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "Have you considered the offer I conveyed last night?" "I have." "And?" "I have some questions first." "Ask away." Naomi glanced at Warden Reeves, who was listening intently, then back at Patricia. The warden's presence complicated things, but it also provided a witness to whatever happened next. That could be useful. "If I refuse the offer, how quickly would you attempt to kill me?" Patricia smiled. "Within 48 hours. No sense dragging it out." "And your method?" "Does it matter?" "Professional curiosity." "Fair enough. I'd wait until you were in a situation where guards couldn't respond quickly enough. Shower, recreation yard, medical appointment. I'd approach you directly, give you one final chance to reconsider, and if you still refused, I'd use a technique that would stop your heart without leaving obvious trauma. The death would be attributed to a previously undiagnosed cardiac condition. Very clean, very quick, very final. The casual way she described premeditated murder made several guards shift uncomfortably. Warden Reeves's face had gone pale, but Naomi maintained her composure, treating this like any other tactical briefing. And if I accept the offer, what guarantees do I have that the network will actually honor their commitments? None. You'd be operating on trust, which I understand is in short supply given your history with them. Patricia shrugged. But consider their incentives. They want you working, not dead. Dead assets can't complete contracts. And they've already invested significant resources in arranging my transfer here and setting up the infrastructure to exfiltrate you if you agree. Killing you after you've agreed to work would be counterproductive. Unless they decide I'm more trouble than I'm worth. Always a possibility. But that's the nature of our profession, isn't it? We work for people who could kill us at any moment, and we trust that our usefulness outweighs our inconvenience. Naomi sat back in her chair, appearing to consider this logic. In reality, she was counting guards, noting sight lines, calculating distances. The partition between them was thick plexiglass, probably bulletproof. Patricia's hands remained visible and empty. The setup was designed to prevent violence, which meant any confrontation would have to be verbal rather than physical. Perfect. I have a counteroffer, Naomi said. Patricia's eyebrows rose slightly. This should be interesting. I don't want to work for the network. I don't want to kill for money. I don't want any part of that life. Naomi's voice was steady, clear. But I also don't want to die in here for refusing them. So here's what I propose. I give you information about network operations that I was involved in. Dates, locations, target identities, payment structures. Enough information to cause them significant operational complications and financial losses. In exchange, you tell them that killing me would be unproductive because I've arranged for that information to be released to multiple law enforcement agencies if anything happens to me. The room went absolutely silent. Warden Reeves stood up from her desk. Guards tensed, hands moving toward their equipment. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those flat eyes, calculation or possibly respect. That's called mutually assured destruction, Patricia said slowly. You're threatening to burn down their operations if they come after you. I'm establishing deterrence. They leave me alone. I keep silent. They send someone to kill me. I take them down with me. You understand that releasing that information would implicate you in crimes far beyond manslaughter. You'd be confessing to being an accessory to multiple murders, possibly an active participant. I'm already serving 15 years. What's a few more added to that if it means I get to serve them alive? Patricia leaned back, and for the first time since the meeting began, she looked genuinely impressed. You've got courage, Naomi Cole. Stupid, self-destructive courage, but courage nonetheless. Is that a yes? That's a, let me think about it. Patricia's eyes never left Naomi's face. You're proposing a very dangerous game. The network doesn't respond well to threats, even threats from their own people, especially threats from their own people. Then they should have let me retire peacefully instead of sending you to force a choice. Fair point. Patricia stood up, and immediately 4 guards moved toward her, hands on their tasers. She raised her hands in a placating gesture. Easy, gentlemen, I'm just stretching my legs. Sitting makes my back stiff. Warden Reeves stepped between them and the partition. Ms. Donnelly, sit back down. Now. Patricia complied with exaggerated care. Apologies, Warden. Forgot where I was for a moment. Don't forget again. The warden turned to Naomi. Miss Cole, this meeting is over. Guards, escort both inmates back to their cells. Wait, Patricia said. I need to respond to her proposal. You can respond through official channels or through your ventilation duct conversations. This meeting is terminated. The guards moved in, and Naomi was handcuffed and led toward the door. But as she was being escorted out, Patricia called after her. 72 hours, Naomi. That deadline still stands, but I'll convey your counteroffer to the people who make decisions. We'll see what they think about mutually assured destruction. The door closed, cutting off any further conversation. Naomi was walked back to her cell in silence, the guards' faces showing a mixture of fear and confusion about what they'd just witnessed. When they locked her in and left, she sat on her bed and allowed herself one moment of shaking hands and rapid breathing, the physical release of adrenaline that she'd suppressed during the meeting. She'd just threatened one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the world. She'd done it in front of witnesses, which meant there was no taking it back, no claiming it was a misunderstanding. The network now knew that she'd compiled information about their operations and was prepared to release it if they retaliated against her, which meant they had three options: accept her terms and leave her alone, call her bluff and kill her anyway, or eliminate her so quickly that she couldn't follow through on her threat. The next 72 hours would determine which option they chose. Naomi pulled out her notebook and began writing the most important document of her life, a detailed accounting of every network operation she'd been involved in or had knowledge of: dates, locations, target names, payment amounts, operational procedures, contact protocols. Everything she could remember, organized chronologically and cross-referenced for maximum evidentiary value. She wrote for 6 straight hours, filling every page in her notebook until her hand cramped and her vision blurred. Then she tore out specific pages, folded them carefully, and hid them in locations throughout her cell that would survive even a thorough search: inside the seam of her mattress, behind the toilet, tucked into the gap where the desk met the wall. The original notebook she kept on her person, tucked into her waistband where she could access it or destroy it depending on circumstances. When she finally lay down to sleep that night, she did so with the knowledge that she'd either saved her life or signed her death warrant. There was no middle ground anymore, no safe option, no way to avoid the confrontation that was building toward its inevitable conclusion. Somewhere in cell A1, Patricia Donnelly was composing her own message to the network, conveying Naomi's counteroffer and her own assessment of the situation. And somewhere outside Blackridge's walls, powerful people were receiving that message and deciding whether Naomi Cole was more valuable as an asset or more dangerous as an enemy. The answer would arrive in 72 hours, or possibly sooner. The answer came 18 hours later, not 72. Naomi was lying on her bed, pretending to read while actually monitoring the sounds of the administrative segregation wing when she heard footsteps approaching, multiple people moving with the kind of deliberate coordination that suggested official purpose rather than routine patrol. She sat up as the observation window opened and Warden Reeves's face appeared, but this time the warden's expression carried something Naomi hadn't seen before: genuine fear. "Ms. Cole, I need you to come with me immediately. Don't ask questions, don't argue, just comply." The urgency in her voice made Naomi's tactical instincts flare. She stood without hesitation as the door opened and 4 guards entered, but instead of handcuffs, they formed a protective formation around her, 2 in front, 2 behind, bodies positioned to shield rather than restrain. "What's happening?" Naomi asked as they moved rapidly down the corridor. "Patricia Donnelly is dead," Warden Reeves said, her voice tight. "Medical emergency in her cell approximately 30 minutes ago. Cardiac arrest. She was pronounced dead at the scene despite resuscitation attempts." The words hit Naomi like physical blows. Dead. Patricia Donnelly, Iron Matron, the woman who'd survived 23 years in maximum security, who'd killed with impunity, who'd been sent specifically to deal with Naomi, dead from a heart attack less than a day after their meeting. Except Naomi knew with absolute certainty that it wasn't a heart attack. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "Secure location. There are federal agents waiting to speak with you, and based on what happened to Ms. Donnelly, I'm not taking any chances with your safety." They descended stairs Naomi had never seen before, moving into what appeared to be a sub-basement level of the facility. The walls here were newer, the lighting better, the whole space suggesting recent construction or renovation. They passed through 2 security checkpoints before arriving at a conference room that looked nothing like standard prison architecture. Carpeted floors, actual windows with real glass, furniture that wasn't bolted down. Agent Chen was waiting inside, along with 2 other people in federal badges and serious expressions. But what caught Naomi's attention was the woman sitting at the far end of the table, 50-something, gray hair cut in a severe bob, wearing an expensive suit that screamed power and authority. She stood when Naomi entered, and the way everyone else in the room deferred to her made it clear she was in charge. "Ms. Cole," the woman said, her voice carrying the crisp articulation of someone educated at elite institutions. "My name is Director Sarah Vance. I run a task force that investigates domestic and international criminal organizations. Please sit down. We have a lot to discuss and very little time to do it." The guards remained outside as the door closed. Naomi sat in the indicated chair, her mind racing through implications and probabilities. A director-level federal agent didn't show up to a prison meeting unless the situation was significant enough to justify that level of attention. Patricia Donnelly wasn't killed by a heart attack, Naomi said, not bothering with preliminaries. She was assassinated. Director Vance's expression didn't change. What makes you say that? Because the organization she worked for doesn't leave loose ends. I threatened to expose their operations if they came after me. She conveyed that threat to them, and they eliminated her before she could become a liability or decide that my information was valuable enough to trade for her own deal. That's an interesting theory. Can you prove it? Can you? She's your crime scene. A thin smile crossed Director Vance's face. The preliminary autopsy results show potassium chloride poisoning delivered through her insulin pen. She was diabetic, injected herself regularly, and someone replaced her medication with a lethal dose of a substance that mimics natural cardiac arrest. It was professional, clean, and would have gone undetected if our forensics team hadn't been looking for exactly this kind of elimination. Then you already knew she was in danger. We suspected the organization you both worked for would respond to your threat. We didn't anticipate they'd move this quickly or this boldly. Director Vance opened a folder on the table. Agent Chen briefed me on your previous conversation. You declined protective custody in exchange for cooperation. But circumstances have changed significantly. Patricia Donnelly is dead because she knew too much. You're alive because you haven't provided your information yet, which makes you simultaneously valuable and vulnerable. You want me to turn witness. I want you to survive long enough to destroy an organization that's been operating with impunity for 3 decades. And I'm prepared to offer you terms that actually address your legitimate concerns about security. Director Vance leaned forward. Full witness protection, not through traditional WITSEC channels, but through a specialized program we run for high-value witnesses who face sophisticated threats. You'd be moved to a secure federal facility under assumed identity, held in protective custody during trial preparation, and relocated internationally after testimony with resources to establish a new life. In exchange for what? Everything you know: names, dates, locations, operational procedures, financial structures. We want the network exposed, dismantled, and prosecuted. Director Vance's voice hardened. They just murdered a woman in federal custody, Ms. Cole. They reached inside a prison I'm supposed to be protecting and killed someone to send you a message. That's not just criminal, that's a direct challenge to federal authority. And I don't respond well to challenges. Naomi studied the director's face, seeing the genuine anger beneath the professional composure. This wasn't just about law enforcement. It was personal. The network had embarrassed her, had demonstrated that their reach extended into spaces she considered secure, and she wanted revenge dressed up as justice. That made her dangerous, but also potentially useful. If I cooperate, I want immunity from prosecution for any crimes I committed while working for the network, Naomi said. Full immunity, in writing, signed by a prosecutor with authority to guarantee it. That can be arranged. I want my sister placed in protective custody during the investigation and trial. She's a civilian, but the network knows about her and won't hesitate to use her as leverage against me. Agreed. And I want my sentence for the manslaughter conviction vacated. Not reduced, not commuted, vacated. The self-defense claim was legitimate. The prosecution was corrupted by network influence, and I want the conviction erased from my record. Director Vance exchanged glances with the other agents. That's more complicated. It requires judicial review, appeals process, new evidence demonstrating corruption. You have new evidence. You have me, testifying that the network arranged for my conviction to ensure I stayed silent about what I knew. You have Patricia Donnelly's murder, demonstrating their willingness to kill to protect their secrets. You have resources and authority to make this happen if you want it badly enough. Naomi's voice was steady, but carried an edge of finality. Those are my terms. Meet them, and I'll give you everything you need to destroy the network. Refuse them, and I'll take my chances with whatever comes next. The room was silent for a long moment. Director Vance stood and walked to the window, staring out at the prison yard visible beyond the glass. Her body language suggested intense internal calculation, weighing the value of Naomi's cooperation against the difficulty of meeting her demands. You drive a hard bargain, Ms. Cole. I learned from the best. Director Vance turned back to face her. All right, I'll agree to your terms with one modification. The conviction vacation will be contingent on successful prosecution of network leadership. If your testimony leads to convictions, we'll petition the court to vacate your sentence based on prosecutorial misconduct and coerced evidence. If the prosecution fails, you serve out your remaining time in federal protective custody, but the conviction stands. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than Naomi had realistically hoped for. She nodded slowly. Acceptable. When do we start? Right now. Director Vance gestured to the other agents, who immediately produced recording equipment and legal documents. We're going to spend the next several hours documenting everything you remember about network operations. Then we're going to move you to a secure federal facility where you'll work with our team to build prosecutable cases. This is going to be difficult, dangerous, and will fundamentally change your life. Are you prepared for that? Naomi thought about the past 3 years, the carefully maintained silence, the prison routine, the constant awareness that her past was never truly past. She thought about Patricia Donnelly lying dead in a cell, eliminated by the same people who'd trained and employed both of them. She thought about her sister, who wrote letters full of hope and encouragement without knowing the full truth of what Naomi had done or who she'd worked for. I'm prepared, she said. The next 6 hours passed in a blur of questions, answers, and documentation. Naomi spoke into recording devices and answered inquiries from agents who specialized in different aspects of organized crime. She drew organizational charts, identified photographs, explained operational procedures she'd learned during her training. Every piece of information was cross-referenced, verified against existing intelligence, and assembled into a comprehensive picture of how the network functioned. By the time they finished the initial debriefing, night had fallen outside the windows. Director Vance looked exhausted but grimly satisfied. This is extraordinary, she said, reviewing pages of notes. In 6 hours, you've provided more actionable intelligence on the network than we've gathered in 6 years of investigation. If even half of this is verifiable, we can launch simultaneous operations across multiple jurisdictions. It's all verifiable, Naomi said quietly. I was there. I participated. I remember. I believe you. Director Vance closed the folder. We're moving you tonight. Transport is already arranged. You'll be taken to a federal facility in an undisclosed location where you'll continue working with our team while we build the prosecution. Warden Reeves has been briefed and is cooperating fully. What about the other inmates? The people I've gotten to know here? They'll be told you've been transferred for security reasons, which is true, just not the complete truth. Director Vance stood. I need you to understand something, Ms. Cole. The moment you leave this prison, your old life ends completely. You can't contact anyone from your past, can't maintain connections to this facility, can't reach out to people you care about until after the trials conclude and you're relocated. It's going to be lonely and difficult, but it's the only way to keep you safe. Naomi nodded, feeling the weight of that isolation settling onto her shoulders. She thought about Tamika, who'd tried so hard to protect her. About Margaret, who'd shown maternal kindness to a stranger. About Jackie, who was learning to read and dreaming of a different future. She wouldn't get to say goodbye, wouldn't get to explain, would simply disappear from their lives like a ghost. Can I write letters? She asked. Nothing that compromises security, just letting people know I'm okay? After the trials, yes. During the investigation and prosecution, no, I'm sorry, but that's non-negotiable. I understand. 2 hours later, Naomi was escorted through Blackridge's underground tunnel system to a loading dock she'd never known existed. An unmarked van waited with federal agents inside, and the transfer happened with military precision. No witnesses, no documentation, no trail that could be followed. As the van pulled away from Blackridge Women's Correctional Facility, Naomi looked back through the tinted windows at the building that had been her home for 11 months. Somewhere inside, women were sleeping or whispering through vents, or planning tomorrow's small rebellions against institutional control. Somewhere inside, her cell in administrative segregation stood empty, her few possessions already cataloged and stored. Somewhere inside, the quiet library girl had become a legend that would be told and retold until fact and fiction blurred beyond recognition. The federal facility was located in rural Virginia, disguised as a corporate training center, but actually serving as a secure location for high-value witnesses awaiting trial. Naomi's new accommodations were significantly better than prison. A private room with actual furniture, windows without bars, access to computers and research materials. But it was still a cage, just a more comfortable one. She spent 3 months working with federal prosecutors, building cases against network leadership and operational personnel. Every detail she provided was investigated, corroborated, and transformed into legal documentation that would hold up in court. Grand juries were convened in secret. Indictments were sealed until the moment they could be executed simultaneously. During this time, Naomi learned that the network's response to Patricia Donnelly's death had been immediate and brutal. 3 mid-level operators who'd known about the Black Ridge situation had been eliminated within days. 2 others had disappeared entirely, presumably into their own versions of protective custody. The organization was consuming itself in paranoid purges, trying to identify the leak that had brought federal attention. They never suspected that Naomi herself was the source, because the last intelligence they'd received suggested she was still in Black Ridge administrative segregation, isolated and contained. The trials began in month 4. Naomi testified in closed proceedings, her identity protected, her face never photographed, her voice distorted in recordings. She sat across from men and women she'd worked with, people who'd trained her and employed her and sent her to do things she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. And she told the truth about all of it. The murders disguised as accidents, the political assassinations presented as natural deaths, the financial crimes that funded operations across 3 continents. The defense attorneys tried to discredit her, calling her a convicted killer who turned on her employers to save herself. But the evidence she'd provided was overwhelming. Financial records, operational logs, surveillance footage that matched her testimony down to the smallest detail. The juries believed her because the facts supported every word she spoke. 17 network operatives were convicted in federal court. 8 more took plea deals in exchange for their own cooperation. The organization's leadership structure collapsed as indictments cascaded through their ranks. Assets were frozen, operations were disrupted, and the invisible infrastructure that had existed for 3 decades was methodically dismantled. Director Vance kept her promise. When the prosecutions concluded successfully, she personally filed the motion to vacate Naomi's conviction, presenting evidence that network operatives had corrupted the investigation and prosecution of her manslaughter case. The judge reviewed the documentation, heard testimony about prosecutorial misconduct, and granted the motion without hesitation. Naomi Cole's conviction was vacated. The sentence was erased. She was legally innocent of the crime she'd spent 3 years imprisoned for. But freedom came with conditions. She couldn't return to her old life, couldn't reclaim her old identity, couldn't reconnect with anyone who'd known her before. She was given a new name, new documents, new history. Her sister was relocated as well, given her own fresh start in a city chosen for its distance from anyone who might connect them to their past. On a cold morning in March, 18 months after Patricia Donnelly's death, Naomi walked out of the federal facility in Virginia and into a world that no longer knew who she really was. She carried 1 bag containing clothes, some cash, and documentation for her new identity. Everything else had been left behind: her past, her crimes, her service, her sacrifice. Director Vance met her at the gate, offering a handshake and final words of advice. "You have a chance at a real life now," the director said. "A life where you're not looking over your shoulder, where you're not being used by people who see you as a tool. Don't waste it." "I don't plan to," Naomi said. "And Ms. Cole, or should I say Ms. Anderson now, thank you. What you did took courage. A lot of people are alive because you chose truth over survival. A lot of people are dead because I spent years choosing survival over truth. This just balances the scales a little." She got into the waiting car that would take her to her new life in a small coastal town in Oregon. The driver was a federal marshal who'd been briefed on her situation but didn't ask questions. They drove in silence for 6 hours, stopping only for gas and coffee, until they reached a town called Bayshore, population 8,000, known for fishing and tourism and the kind of quiet anonymity that Naomi desperately needed. Her new apartment overlooked the ocean. It was small, furnished with basics, and completely unremarkable. Perfect. She spent the first week just existing, walking on the beach, buying groceries, learning the rhythms of a town where nobody knew her history or expected anything from her. In the second week, she got a job at the local library. The manager was an older woman named Ruth, who asked few questions and appreciated Naomi's careful attention to organizing the collection. The work was peaceful, familiar, reminiscent of the library at Blackridge, but without the undercurrent of violence and fear. In the third week, she received her first letter from her sister, carefully routed through federal channels to prevent tracing, but unmistakably from the only family she had left. The letter was full of hope and new beginnings, talking about her sister's new job, new apartment, new boyfriend who didn't know anything about their past. Reading it made Naomi cry for the first time since her conviction, tears of relief mixed with grief for everything they'd both lost and everything they might still build. She wrote back carefully, keeping details vague, focusing on the positive, the ocean, the library job, the quiet town that felt like a place where she could finally breathe. She didn't mention the nightmares that still woke her at 3 a.m., didn't talk about the way she still checked sightlines and exit routes everywhere she went, didn't confess that she sometimes wondered if the network would eventually find her despite all the federal protection. Months passed, then a year. The town accepted her as Mrs. Anderson, the quiet librarian who kept to herself but was always helpful when patrons needed assistance. She developed a routine: work, walks on the beach, occasional dinners with Ruth and her husband, weekly letters to her sister. It wasn't the life she'd imagined before the network, but it was a life, real, honest, and entirely her own. On the second anniversary of her release, Naomi was reshelving books in the library's biography section when a young woman approached her with a question about the civil rights movement. The woman was maybe 22, earnest and engaged, asking intelligent questions about historical parallels to current events. They talked for 30 minutes about justice and change and the long arc of progress that required constant work. And as Naomi explained the concepts, helping this young person understand the complexity of social transformation, she realized that this was enough. This small moment of teaching, of sharing knowledge, of helping someone grow, this was the contribution she could make now. She thought about Brenda Knox, who she'd heard through carefully vetted channels had been released early for good behavior and was now working in a warehouse, keeping her head down and staying out of trouble. She thought about Ice Mitchell, still running operations from inside Blackridge, but with reduced power after the network's collapse disrupted her supply chains. She thought about Tamika, who'd completed her GED and was 3 years closer to going home. She thought about Margaret, who wrote occasional letters through the warden's office to Ms. Anderson, talking about the library and the women who missed the quiet girl who'd briefly transformed their understanding of what strength looked like. And she thought about Patricia Donnelly, Iron Matron, who'd been so certain that violence was the only currency that mattered until the organization she'd served decided she was no longer worth keeping alive. The quiet ones weren't harmless, Naomi had learned, but they also weren't defined by the violence they could deploy. They were defined by the choices they made when violence became optional rather than necessary. That evening, Naomi walked on the beach as the sun set over the Pacific, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of the sunset through her cell window at Blackridge. But this time, there were no bars between her and the horizon. This time, the only cage was the one she chose to accept or refuse each day. She chose freedom. Not the kind that came from running or hiding or destroying enemies before they could destroy her, but the kind that came from accepting her past without being defined by it, from building a future that honored both who she'd been and who she wanted to become, from understanding that redemption wasn't a destination but a daily practice. The waves crashed against the shore with rhythmic persistence, wearing down rocks and reshaping coastlines through patient consistency. Naomi stood there, watching until the stars appeared, tiny points of light against the vast darkness, each one burning with quiet intensity that didn't need to announce itself to be real. She walked back to her apartment, made dinner, and sat down to write her weekly letter to her sister. The words came easily now, full of ordinary details about an ordinary life that felt more extraordinary than anything she'd experienced in her previous existence. Tomorrow she'd go back to the library. She'd help patrons find books. She'd organize shelves. She'd answer questions about topics she'd once thought she'd never discuss again. And it would be enough. Because the quiet ones, she'd finally learned, weren't waiting to explode into violence or reveal hidden power. They were simply living their lives with intentional calm, refusing to let the chaos of the world dictate who they became. And in that refusal, in that persistent, quiet dignity, lay a strength that no amount of violence could ever replicate or destroy. The story of Naomi Cole ended not with a dramatic confrontation or triumphant victory, but with a woman reshelving books in a small-town library, having saved her soul by choosing truth over survival and peace over power. Sometimes the greatest act of courage wasn't fighting the monsters who came for you. Sometimes it was refusing to become one yourself.